This is Atomic Shinobi and today I'm going to narrate second part of what if Naruto's parents broke free from Edo Tensei. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Sasuke gazed up at the four figures, studying each one individually. The first figure was a big, plump man who was most likely in his mid-teens. He had tufts of hair on the side of his head and an unusual mohawk with orangish hair. The second figure was a man with black hair and darker skin. Of the four, this one was the most peculiar since he had 8 arms and was the only one with a music note on the front of his forehead protector. The third figure was a male with pale skin who appeared to have some effeminate traits. He also had a growth that seemed to be coming out of his back. His right eye was hidden by his bluish gray hair. His lips were also bluish. The last figure was a female with a slender frame and long, red hair that was shaggy and capped. He saw that she was frowning and that a flute was protruding from her pocket. With only slight modifications, each of the four of them was dressed in the same uniform. A purple rope around their waist and a light tan cloak. When he looked up at them, Sasuke sneered and said, "Oh, and what could you possibly help me with that? You don't look all that powerful." "Is that so?" When Sasuke realized the 8-armed figure was no longer there, he froze and felt icy steel against the back of his neck. Slowly, he turned his head to see the spider. Like Shinobi's smiling face. The spider-man laughed. "The funny thing is, brat, that in the time we have spent talking with you, we could have killed you 100 times over, each, and still had time to enjoy a bowl of miso soup." Sasuke saw the figure disappear and then reappear with the other 3 atop the roof. The bigger one rose to the occasion. "However, as powerful as we are, it is not even a fraction of what our master is offering you, in addition to the thing you desire most of all." As the realization dawned on Sasuke, he glanced between them and said, "You mean?" With wide eyes as he turned to face the big man. The bluish, gray-haired man replied, "I think that's what you want most, isn't it? The chance to murder Itachi Uchiha." Sasuke's thoughts were racing, so he lowered his head. It simply seemed too good to be true. His life's ambition has always been to kill Itachi Uchiha by any means necessary with no other choice. He would give up his clan, his wealth, everything, and now he had the chance he had been waiting for all his life. It must have been a ruse. Power was not as simple to acquire as he had believed, and few people could successfully give him the power he wanted, despite his reluctance to acknowledge this. "Who is your master? The one offering me this power?" he asked, raising his gaze to the four again. As he spoke, the four remained silent and did not move to respond to his query. "Answer me. Who is your master?" yelled Sasuke with a sneer. "Haven't you figured it out, you cock-sucking shithead?" The red-haired girl merely snorted and laughed. Sasuke said sarcastically, "Why, you little? It's the same one who put that mark on your neck." When Sasuke heard that, he froze. He examined the seal on his neck, or at least the edge of it, using what he could see in his peripheral vision. Orochimaru, it was he who offered him authority. "Well, Uchiha, what is your answer?" chirped the spider shinobi. After a brief moment of staring down, Sasuke raised his head and said, "I'm listening," his Sharingan eyes blazing. In the interim, Konoha Library. After entering the library, Minato and Kushina started looking for the location where Hana had given them instructions. They discovered that the library was entirely different from what they had remembered when they strolled through the halls. They looked for the row for nearly an hour. At last, they located the row. Then they proceeded as Hana had instructed them to do. Looking along the 6th shelf, Kushina exclaimed, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45. Minato. I found it, as she smiled and held out the book. With a sigh, Minato picked up the book and asked herself, "Why this book, why?" as she studied the cover. With a raised eyebrow, Kushina said, "What, it is just a sutra book." Minato exhales, "I know, that is the problem." After inhaling deeply, he opened the book and started flipping through the pages. Finally, after some time, he discovered something was wrong. Upon closer inspection, he saw faint etchings on page 97. A properly trained seal master could easily identify them, but to the untrained eye, they appeared more like wear and tear. He showed them to Kushina and said, "See? These are old codings, these are the foundation of advanced sealing techniques." "That's right, but what do they mean?" Kushina asked, her eyes widening as she studied the page intently. Minato looked more closely. He produced a sheet of paper and a tiny bit of ink. He pulled a brush from his pocket and set the book down on the table. He spread the ink on the paper after dabbing the brush gently in it and placing the paper on top of the page with the indicated seal. The seal's design was slightly easier to see because of the paper's emphasis on it. At last, Minato paused and examined the seal once more. Kushina glanced over his shoulder as well. These look like advanced coatings, but there is something off about them, Minato said, squinting at the writing and crossing his arms. They're backwards, he said, his eyes widening slightly as he took another look. Kushina gave him a questioning glance and said, backwards? How do you know? Kushina, Minato sighed, I studied these seals for half of my shinobi life, so I have a hazy notion of their appearance. These are obviously backwards. Minato started turning the page so she could see it from the opposite side. And so did Kushina. A tick mark appeared on both of their foreheads as they gazed at the now normal coatings, saying, oh come on, another book? Hospital. Lobby. There were Hinata, Temari, Ayame, Tucci, and Yakumo in the lobby, all of whom were there to see Naruto. Kurenai could not just sit around because she had Jonin duties. With a sigh, Hinata turned to face Temari. Temari sighed and looked up at Hinata, attempting to ignore her gaze. Yes? After giving her a long look, Hinata said, what do you want with Naruto? With a raised eyebrow, Temari asked, what do you mean? Quickly getting to her feet, Hinata glared at Temari and asked, what do you want with Naruto? I'm curious as to why, as a foreign shinobi who has only been in the village for 3 months, you seem to be obsessed with Naruto. The question made Temari wince, and she looked down. Yakumo, Tucci, and Ayame were observing the two of them, wondering what would happen. Well, scowled Hinata. Naruto saved me from being raped during the 1-month break in the Chunin exams, Temari said, letting out a sigh and looking up at her. In any way I can, I want to pay him back. What do you mean by, whatever way you can? Hinata asked, her eyes widening slightly before narrowing. Temari winced and took a step forward to speak. A voice said over the intercom, a patient has escaped the hospital, Naruto Uzumaki. Namikaze has escaped the hospital, all available personnel locate him immediately. This was followed by a loud blaring noise and red flashes of light throughout the hospital. After cursing at the announcement, the people in attendance started their arduous journey to find the blonde-haired Jinchuriki. Library of Konoha. They discovered another book with Hana's signature seals in it, and Minato slammed his head against a desk. Row 15, column X, shelf 7, book 34, page 193. Kushina opened the stack of books to the page where each seal was found and moaned as she examined the stack to which Hana had applied her seal. They had spent hours doing this, finding the books, opening them, and then finding more books. It was getting really boring, especially since each book had taken them to a different area of the library, only to have to repeat the process. Looking around, Kushina got to her feet and said, row 12, 13, 14, 15. When she reached the 7th shelf, she started counting the books, saying, book 32, book 33, book 34. She sighed and pulled it off the shelf, saying, please for the love of Kami let this be the last one. She had walked across the row and looked along the columns, column X. As they opened the book to the assigned page, Minato approached the table. They stared at the book as they discovered, underlined words, page 193. Please tell me, Minato asked, staring at Kushina. With a nod, Kushina said, yeah, it is. So, you are telling me that we have spent hours looking at different books, all of which have advanced seal coatings in them that are backwards, all to get to this book, where instead of finding another complex seal to lead the way, we find underlined words? Minato asked, staring at her for a few seconds before putting his hand to his forehead and rubbing it. By nodding her head, Kushina says, that pretty much sums it up. Minato gazed, and gazed. He looked at the book and sighed in frustration before slamming his head against the table and saying, damn it. All right, let's see what Hana wrote then, shall we? After grinning and giving Minato a head pat, Kushina turned to the page and started reading the underlined words. The key is held in the home of lost souls. After giving the question some thought, Minato and Kushina sighed and said, orphanage. They immediately put down the book, gathered the necessary paperwork, and hurried to the orphanage. The mess they left behind did not sit well with the librarians. In the meantime, Naruto was moving as far away from the hospital as he could, down a back alley in Konoha. The fact that the Yondaime had helped him in any way made him feel repulsed. In fact, he was so sickened by it that he considered checking himself into the hospital. Without wasting any time, Naruto sped toward his house after shaking his head. He would have noticed two figures observing him if he had been listening. An orphanage. When Minato and Kushina arrived at the orphanage, they were greeted by a sea of adorable children. The two went straight to the front desk, ignoring the kids, even though they felt bad that their hopes would be dashed. Hello, what can I do for you today? Said the smiling woman at the front desk. Why? Yondaime. Sama. Ii-ha. Her heart pounded upon seeing the Yondaime before her. Look, Kushina said with a sigh and a shake of her head, before you ask if we came for a child, the answer is no, but we should ask if Hana Hyuga ever visited here a few years ago. After a few minutes of staring, the woman's eyes widened a little and she said, oh yes, as a matter of fact she did. She got down on her knees and began removing the drawers from the front desk, saying, let's see, Hana Hyuga. Hana Hyuga, got it. She got up and put a small box on the desk and said, here it is. She dropped this off, never could figure out why, since nobody could ever open it. When Minato and Kushina looked at the box, they noticed that it had 25 concentric circles with coatings on it. The coatings appeared to be very familiar. Minato turned to Kushina after examining the pile of ink-covered paper and said, it's the same ones from the library. After examining the papers, Kushina turned to face Minato and said, you're right, they are. She then picked up the box and said, come on, we got to figure this puzzle out rig. Yondaime. Sama. Kurenai Yuhi was standing in the doorway, panting heavily, when the two turned to look around. Naruto, hospital, escape, again. What? Angrily, Minato and Kushina yelled, when did he escape? The words, few minutes ago, made Kurenai wince and shiver. Kurenai was left in the orphanage when Minato and Kushina snatched up the box and hurried out the door after Minato. In the meantime, with Naruto with a sigh, Naruto ascended the stairs to his apartment, arrived at his door, and went inside, not realizing that he was being followed as his assailants went up the stairs. In the meantime, in addition to being in Naruto's sandal size and having the same impression as Naruto, Kushina and Minato had quickly arrived at Naruto's hospital room and inspected the room, noticing the open window and the scuff marks from the sandals rubbing against the concrete, which were clearly fairly recent. Any present in Izuka, get in here and see if you can locate my son's scent and find him. Minato swore as she glanced back at the doorway of the hospital room, where a number of Anbu were waiting for orders. An Inuzuka quickly stepped forward and followed instructions. The Inuzuka got to his feet and said, Yondaime. Sama, he was not kidnapped because the scent is only a few minutes old and does not contain any other scents. It appears that the scent points in the direction of the inner village rather than the gates. Kushina and Minato kept staring at him. Well? The Inuzuka was asked by Kushina. What do you mean, Kushina? Sama? The Inuzuka gulped. Kushina gave him another glance and said, you are not flying out that window in an attempt to find him, if you have a read on his scent and general location. Well, tell me why. She yelled, snatching the Inuzuka by the hair and hurling him out the window. Ah! As Kushina's throw sent the Inuzuka hurtling over the hospital grounds and into the stall of a merchant who was too slow to move out of the way, the Inuzuka screamed. While Kushina turned to face them and sneered, anyone want to join him? The Anbu remained in the doorway, staring. Poof! Without wanting to feel Kushina's anger, the entire Anbu instantly shunned and set out to find the young, blonde Jinchuriki. With a sigh, Minato glanced out the window, praying his son was not hurt. Alongside Naruto. You'd think after all the times I have broken out of that hospital they would have better security measures, Naruto said, taking a deep breath and rubbing at his wounds while plopping down on his sofa. Damn Sasuke, could not even let me eat my ramen before he attacked me, damn prick. He shook his head and then turned to face his stomach, which was complaining, damn Sasuke, could not even let me eat my ramen before he attacked me, damn prick. He then got up and went to his cabinet and took out as much ramen as he could. Knock, knock. When Naruto heard a knock on the door, he stopped in the middle of getting his ramen and scowled. He then took a kunai out of a secret compartment and sneered as he yelled, who is it? Naruto, it's me. Please let me in. With a slight widening of his eyes, Naruto sighed and lowered his kunai, saying, come in lowly. The Uchiha compound. While he was preparing, Sasuke Uchiha gazed out the window while the whole Anbu force frantically searched for the blonde son of Yondaime of Konoha. He scowled as he observed the village and all of its pride and so-called honor, which only served to obstruct his path to justice and his rightful retribution. However, those four sound nin, who worked for Orochimaru, the man who left his mark, had presented a strong case, and he understood that he was at a turning point in his life and that he only needed to make a decision. Stay in Konoha and uphold its principles in the hopes that they will grant him his wish at some point. Or go, and his retaliation will be guaranteed. He made his decision without much consideration. After wrapping up his belongings, Sasuke watched the shinobi resume their search for Naruto. He had a few hours to kill before departing this village for Orochimaru, after all. Hinata already knew Naruto's living address, so it had not taken them long to find him, and they were sitting on the building directly horizontal to Naruto's apartment, carefully looking through the window. After learning of Naruto's escape, Hinata immediately headed toward Naruto's apartment. Temari reasoned that since Hinata was going in such a clear direction, she must have known where Naruto would be, so she decided to follow her. Hinata was very tempted to try to deceive Temari into going in a different direction, but her desire to find Naruto outweighed her desire to get Temari off her back. Hinata had reached Naruto's apartment, but he had not yet shown up. Given his recent change in attitude, she wasn't sure if waiting for him in his apartment would be well received, so she decided to wait for him on the building parallel to his own. It had taken her some time to find the ideal spot to observe his apartment without using her Byakugan, and Temari had followed Hinata to the spot she had selected. Hinata briefly considered using a Juken strike on Temari, but she stopped herself when Naruto showed up at his apartment building. Temari thought along the same lines as Hinata, but she watched Naruto with a weapon ready at her side. They had to hold back from taking drastic action when they saw Loli enter his home. They were still trying to stop themselves from trying to attack Loli, even after a few minutes had passed. "Who is that woman?" Temari whispered as he looked at Hinata, and the heiress looked back. Glancing back, Hinata scowled and said, I don't know. But it looks like they're close to Naruto-kun. Eyes narrowed at the woman Naruto appeared to be so friendly with. Temari scowled and turned back to the apartment complex. 2 buildings away, the 2 kunoichi were so distracted that they failed to notice a whirl and blur of leaves. In the meantime, with her arms pathetically dangling at her sides, Sakura Haruno was stalking down the streets of Konoha, her posture slouched as she left the training grounds. She'd just finished training, if that's what it was called. Sakura wasn't really doing much more than a few kicks, punches, and maybe a few laps and exercises, mostly just standing in the training grounds with her overactive imagination creating complicated fantasies about her and Sasuke getting married and falling in love. Very pitiful, but not surprising. Sakura, who was raised in a civilian family, had never had any role models other than civilians to aspire to. She believed that she was pursuing grandeur, fame, and glory for herself when she enrolled in the Shinobi Academy, but her upbringing in a civilian setting had made her oblivious to the actual horrors of being a shinobi. The sheltered civilians who typically sent their children to the academy did so on the pretext that they wanted their children to have a better life than a civilian one, but in reality, it was their own self-serving desire to elevate their family's status and power. The civilian population in Konoha had little reason to be afraid, so they were unaware of the dangers that existed outside the walls of Konohagakure no Sato. Very pitiful. Since Konoha is a shinobi village, even if her parents hadn't brainwashed her, she probably would have been drawn to the shinobi lifestyle anyhow. Sakura was born in a similar environment, unaware of the horrors of the shinobi lifestyle, and was coerced into the program after being properly brainwashed and indoctrinated to desire such a lifestyle. Nevertheless, she had been brought up with the mindset of a very pampered civilian and the ambition to become a shinobi. Therefore, it was easy to predict her reaction when Tsunade turned her down for training. The first thing that came to mind for Sakura was how unfair it was, how she was being denied what was rightfully hers, and how the door to her future had suddenly been slammed in her face. Before long, she began to wonder why she had been turned down for training. Of course, her mindset would never permit her to believe that she was at fault. Instead, it generated dozens of scenarios that seemed far more likely than the obvious, until at last she reached the only conclusion that even remotely seemed possible. That Sasuke was Tsunade's property. In light of this, Sakura made the decision to go directly to the Uchiha compound in the hopes of catching Sasuke and demonstrating to him her love and the fact that he didn't need anyone else but her. The sun was already setting when she reached the Uchiha compound, and fewer people were on the streets than before. Sakura scampered up to the compound's entrance and was about to enter when she noticed something in the corner of her eye. She watched as a dark figure leapt over the compound's walls and started to make her way swiftly to the main gates. Despite being a terrible kunoichi, Sakura was able to identify her object of affection with ease because of her obsession with the Uchiha. And it was obvious to her that the dark figure was actually Sasuke Uchiha. With her goal in mind, she hurried after the Uchiha while being cautious to maintain her distance. At the same time, "Are you absolutely certain of what you saw?" Minato and Kushina asked, glancing at the Anbu in front of them who had just completed reporting to them. "Hi, Yandaime. Sama, Kushina. Sama." Naruto Uzumaki was in his apartment when a woman entered, the Anbu said, nodding their heads. "I hurried back as soon as I could after you voluntarily let her in." With a scowl, Kushina said, "Was there anything else?" "Hi. Hinata Hyuga and Temari no Sabaku were on the building parallel to Naruto's apartment complex," the Anbu said with a nod. They didn't appear to have any bad intentions. Return to your post, report to me if there are any new developments. Kushina scowled, but he turned to face Minato, who sighed heavily. And I do mean anything, Minato said, narrowing his eyes as a sharp burst of ki erupted. After swallowing and nodding their head, the Anbu swiftly disappeared in a shunshin. Minato reached into his coat after the Anbu had left and took out the box they had taken from the orphanage. It was burgundy red and had 25 concentric circles covering it, all of which had the same coating as the ones in the library. They knew that something was inside, but how in the hell were they going to open it? Kushina scowled. She knew that this box had to be important, or else Hiashi's now deceased wife would not have put it in the orphanage. Regardless of the angle from which he viewed the symbols on the box, Minato was unable to decipher their meaning or purpose from them. Minato, these symbols are similar to the ones at the library. Maybe if we look at the library symbols, we can figure something out? Kushina said, grabbing the box and examining it. Minato nodded his head and said, maybe. He got out the copies of the symbols they had created from a small stack of papers on his desk and spread them out on his desk, starting to go through them. Kushina was also glancing between the papers and the box. This went on for 30 minutes, but they were still unable to determine the meaning of these symbols in relation to the symbols on the box, assuming there was one at all. Maybe it's just a coincidence. Kushina sighed. Could it be that Hana simply followed the library's coding style? I would like to think that, but I know Hana well enough to know that she would never do anything like this by accident, Minato said, shaking his head. His eyes darted between the pages in the box, and he started to mutter curses. There must be a way into this box, and these symbols must be the damn key. Minato.kun, we were dead for several years before Hana did this. It is possible that she... Kushina said, placing her hand on Minato's shoulder, but she stopped when her arm's shadow covered the box and the pages. She blinked briefly before focusing on the page in the box. Her eyes grew wide, and she exclaimed, I understand. Kushina, what is it? Minato asked, gazing up at his wife. She pointed to a number on one page and then to the same number on the box in one of the concentric circles. She wrote these letters with different styles of penmanship. We have to match the letters up with the penmanship. That should open the box, Kushina said, grabbing the box and the page. The symbols in the library held codes in them, look. Minato's heart was bursting with happiness as his eyes grew wide and he glanced at the box and then the paper. So, what are we waiting for? Only a few seconds were needed for Kushina and Minato to start. In the meantime, Sasuke Uchiha was moving as fast as he could down the main road, heading for the gates and his new life as a Hubei Sanin student. His mind was racing with ideas of how he would crush Itachi after he crushed everyone who dared to take away his power, and he could already taste the power that would soon be his on his lips. When he considered how he would murder Naruto in front of Minato and Kushina before torturing them both to death, he let a sick smile appear on his face. He was going to run to the gates. Kun Sasuke. When Sakura Haruno abruptly tackled him from behind. As the offending Kunoichi nuzzled into his back, Sasuke snapped his head back to look at her and cursed. Oh Sasuke.kun. I am so glad I got to you in time. Sakura laughed and gave him a tight hug. I came here to tell you that I... Squelch. A kunai burrowing up to the hilt in Sakura's stomach silenced her. Sasuke sneered, yanked her arms away from him, tossed her into the adjacent trash heap, and spat out, pathetic, before turning back to the gates and running away. Alongside Kushina and Minato, the lid clicked open as Minato and Kushina inserted the final key into the box, which soon started to click and whir as the circles rotated. Minato hurriedly lifted the lid and peered within, to discover a corroded kunai with handle etchings. Looking at the kunai, Kushina scowled and said, "What the hell is this?" With a look of surprise on his face, Minato clutched the kunai and said, "This is my first prototype of my Hiraishin kunai." "But what does that mean?" Kushina asked, glancing at Minato. Looking at Kushina, Minato scowled and said, "We will have to leave the village if it means what I believe it does. I only ever use these kunai in secret training areas tucked away in the Hai no Kuni forests, outside Konoha's walls. But who will be in charge of the village? I in charge of Naruto." Kushina bit her lip. "Tsunade is the only person I trust to keep our child safe," Minato said, scowling as he sat down and turned back to Kushina. "Until we get back, she will have to take over as Hokage. I will go and tell her the news. You pack everything up." Kushina nodded her head in agreement and hurried to the door to locate Tsunade. Before leaving the cage tower, Minato sighed, glanced at the kunai in his hand, and slipped it into his jacket. In the meantime, with a smile on their face, the owner approached a small dog that was sniffing at a pile of trash and said, "Now Scruffy, you know you aren't supposed to eat the garbage." The dog started barking angrily at the trash and growled at it. "Now, Why are you barking at the... Ah? The owner scowled. When the owner lifted up one of the trash bags and saw Sakura Haruno barely breathing, many rats had already started eating at her flesh. They jumped back in horror. The owner started to yell, "Help," as he glanced around. "Assist." Gates to the west. Kushina had come with the good news that Tsunade was willing to cover for them while they left the village after Minato had completed packing up the supplies. Before leaving to find out what they prayed to every deity would help them get their son back, they took one last look around the village as they were leaving. If only they were aware of the consequences of their choice. Not that she could really blame them, but she wished they had given her more than 5 minutes notice before naming her the stand.in Hokage. While they were out of the village, Tsunade moaned in frustration as she looked at the mountain of paperwork that had accumulated over the last few days. Minato did nothing at all when it came to paperwork, even though he had retaken his position as Hokage, because he was too busy trying to convince Naruto that he was their son to deal with paperwork. With a heavy sigh, she decided that ranting and groaning about it would not solve the problem and that she should start working on the never-ending stack of paper in front of her before it somehow grew bigger without her knowledge. "Kage Bunshin, no," she said with her fingers in a cross hand sign. CRRSSHH. Tsunade tensed abruptly, brought herself down into the Senju family taijutsu stance, and quickly turned toward the collision. And discovered Shizune opening the office door, a broken bottle of sake on the floor, 2 broken ceramic cups on an empty platter, and a startled expression on her face as she stammered, "Gee. Gomen Nasai Tsunade. Sama." After a few seconds of blinking at her, Tsunade sighed deeply and put her hands in a cross once more. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Suddenly, 3 clones materialized, and she snapped her fingers, causing them to swiftly proceed to the paperwork. Tsunade stopped Shizune from picking up the mess by ordering one of the clones to do it instead. With a sigh, Tsunade sat down in a chair close by and took a bottle of sake out of her coat. "So, Shizune, how are Konoha's forces doing right now?" According to rough estimates, Konoha's forces have dispersed farther than expected since Orochimaru's partially unsuccessful invasion. In addition, many retired shinobi have offered to rejoin the shinobi forces, Shizune said, coughing as she reached into her coat and took out multiple forms. She took out the document and gave it to Tsunade, saying, "I was actually delivering the form for one such shinobi's approved return to Konoha's forces." When Tsunade saw the name at the top of the document, her eyes widened slightly, and she cautiously grasped the edge, blinking twice as she read it. Lowly. Alongside Naruto. Naruto was sitting on his couch, taking in the news while gazing at the floor. In the meantime, Lowly began bringing a small portion of steamed rice and ramen to the table while humming a gentle melody in his tiny kitchen. With his thoughts elsewhere, Naruto appeared unaware of the scent that permeated his apartment. Lowly paused her humming and said, "Dinner is ready," Naruto, turning to face him. Still gazing down at the ground, Naruto did not move beyond the normal rise and fall of his chest. "I apologize, Naruto. I should have told you, but I felt that with everything you are going through right now, Lowly sighed deeply and scowled. Naruto whispered, "Lowly, tell me." Lowly gave him a perplexed look and said, "Tell you what?" Lowly's expression was twisted in bewilderment as she failed to comprehend Naruto's question. With a sigh, Naruto got to his feet and combed his hair before saying, "What makes you want to rejoin the shinobi corps? I heard that you detested being a shinobi, particularly the field in which you were required to work." "Yes, it is true that I detested being a shinobi," Lowly said, lowering her head momentarily and nodding. "I actually detested it so much that I frequently considered turning into a missing nin in order to escape the way of life." Naruto gave her a curious look and said, "So why enlist in the military? You could finally retire after the war because you had fulfilled your duty, so why join them?" Lowly gave Naruto a gentle smile and said, "Naruto, have you noticed Konoha's condition? How few shinobi Konoha has, and how many of the shinobi that are left are compelled to accept higher ranked missions because there aren't enough of them? Are you aware that the consequences have almost crippled us, despite the fact that Orochimaru's desired drastic impact on Konoha's forces was not achieved?" Looking away from Lowly, Naruto scowled and said, "That doesn't answer my question. Naruto, unless I want the only home I have to be destroyed, every single able individual has to pitch in somehow," Lowly said with a sigh as she approached Naruto. "I am simply pitching in the only manner that I am capable of." Naruto looked down and scowled. "I know how you feel, Naruto," Lowly said with a sorrowful smile, "but I have to do this." After a few minutes of silence, Naruto slowly turned his head and said, "Just promise me you will be careful." With a hint of humor, Lowly said, "Hey, I was a member of the Seduction Corps, I wouldn't be here if I wasn't careful." At that, Naruto appeared to laugh dryly. "Well, come on, you need to eat before dinner gets cold," said Loli, grinning and turning back to the table. As Loli sat down and divided the food equally between them, Naruto sighed and went to the table. Even though Naruto appeared indifferent, a close examination revealed a tiny tug at the corner of his lips and a playful gleam in his eyes. In the meantime, after sneaking past the guards, who were assisting some civilian merchants who attempted to smuggle in illegal goods, Sasuke Uchiha was running through the high no-kuni forests, panting heavily. After a minute of panting and staring around, Sasuke began to run again, cursing, "Where the hell are they? They said they would meet me outside the gates." Since he was the only Uchiha still living in the village, he knew that if Sakura's body had not already been found, someone would soon find it and the Inuzuka clan would know that he was the one who killed her. "Where the hell are they?" sneered Sasuke as he drove on. He was unaware that a figure in the trees was closely observing him, but it disappeared as fast as it had appeared. Konoha Morgue. The coroner offered the kunai that had been lodged in Sakura Haruno's stomach after glancing at the Inuzuka police tracker in front of her. "I just want to be sure," she said. "Even though the prints are obvious, it's always good to be safe." The Inuzuka took the kunai gently, nodded, and then knelt down and said, "Sniff." He glanced to his side, where his ninkin was sitting. The Inuzuka frowned as the ninkin complied with the command and sniffed, growling and barking 3 times. Confused, the coroner said, "Well." The coroner scowled as she glanced back at the papers on her desk, which included an open folder with a paper displaying fingerprints, a single name at the top, while the Inuzuka got up and walked out of the room. Sasuke Uchiha. Alongside Tsunade. Tsunade sighed as her shadow clones completed the paperwork, and she perused the 17 other documents from other retired shinobi who were pleading with her to return to the shinobi force. Although Konoha desperately needed qualified shinobi, the reality was that retired shinobi were frequently a liability. Many retirees would become more laid back now that they were no longer in the shinobi services, their skills would deteriorate and they would need to be eased back into the new life despite muscle memory. However, given Konoha's extreme need, it was likely that the retired veterans would be placed back on the front lines right away. Tsunade examined another document with a heavy sigh and said, "Shizune, how many more of these are there?" Looking at her clipboard, Shizune coughed and said, "About 70.6 milady, and counting." The number startled Tsunade, who said, 70.6. She replied, "Yes, it seems that many of the older shinobi, and those who had to retire due to injuries are petitioning to rejoin as well." When Tsunade heard that, she sighed. This led to even more problems because, as Orochimaru's experiments demonstrated, you can't grow back a leg, which is why shinobi were forced to retire due to injuries. However, she would never consider doing so, under any circumstances. Observing Tsunade's expression, Shizune said, "If it helps any, most of the injured shinobi have offered to take the D ranks and paperwork jobs that are too important for civilians to do." When Tsunade realized that dealing with injured shinobi who wanted to take A-rank missions would be extremely difficult, her mood brightened. Shizune grinned, relieved that Tsunade was at least somewhat better. "BMP, BMP, BMP." When they heard someone knocking, Tsunade and Shizune turned to face the door. Tsunade scowled and said, "Enter." The Inuzuka police tracker entered after the door slowly opened. Tsunade scowled even more, asking, "What is it?" Tsunade. "Sama, I have just been to the morgue where the coroner required me to have my ninkin confirm one of her finds on the recent murder of Genin Sakura Haruno," the Inuzuka said, coughing as his ninkin sat next to him. "What?" Tsunade's eyes widened. "A homicide? What happened to one of our genin?" Tsunade. "Sama, a report was sent here not long ago, by one of our officers who confirmed its error." The Inuzuka jumped back, obviously taken aback by her unexpected outburst and unprepared for it. He stopped as he quirked an eye. The 3 shadow clones were still working on paperwork when Tsunade scowled and turned to face the Inuzuka. With a moan, Shizune connected the dots and quickly hurled 3 needles at the clones, instantly scattering them. Tsunade immediately grabbed her head at the unexpected barrage of information before yelling at Shizune, "Damn it, warn me the next time you do that." Shizune twiddled her fingers abruptly, her face flushed with nervousness. With a sigh, Tsunade turned back to face the Inuzuka, and his back was straightened and he coughed. "I was able to confirm the identity of her killer due to the residual scent left on the kunai which had been embedded in her stomach after the coroner extracted the fingerprints from the kunai's hilt. The killer was Genin, Sasuke Uchiha." Shizune's and Tsunade's eyes briefly widened. The Inuzuka went on, "I called in for some of the police to go and detain Sasuke, but it would appear he has snuck out of the village, judging by the location of the body and the scent which had been picked up near the crime scene. Tsunade cursed because if Sasuke had really left the village, she would have a problem because she couldn't send any of the police force because, in the current state of Konoha, an enemy shinobi could use the loss of one police officer to wreak havoc. In addition, all of the Chunin and available Jonin, including the Jonin instructors, were on missions. Shizune recognized the expression on Tsunade's face and knew exactly what she was thinking because of Konoha's current situation. Sasuke's status meant that he could end up in the hands of his enemies if he were allowed to leave, and the Sharingan was too valuable a tool for any of Konoha's enemies to obtain. However, there were neither Chunin nor Jonin available to pursue Sasuke, so there was only one choice. What if we sent available genin to go after him? Shizune said with a sigh. The Inuzuka and Tsunade gazed at her in disbelief. There are no Jonin or Chunin available to go after Sasuke, and he is too valuable an asset, even as simply a reproductive asset, to allow him to roam free, Shizune added, acknowledging their surprise. Either he must be killed and his body destroyed, or he must be arrested and returned. However, Genin is currently the only person available to do this. Knowing she was correct, Tsunade gazed at Shizune and sighed deeply before asking, which Genin are available to do this mission? Shizune pulled out the shinobi team. Amongst the Genin, the only ones who are available to go after Sasuke are Kiba Inuzuka, Choji Akamichi, Neji Hyuga, Hinata Hyuga, Shikamaru Nara, and Naruto Uzu. No, I won't send Naruto on this mission, Tsunade yelled instantly. Shizune gazed at Tsunade and said, Tsunade, may I ask why? Turning her head, Tsunade scowled and said, you know damn well why, Shizune. Shizune looked at Tsunade and said, Tsunade, I know you want to protect him, but right now we are too low on shinobi to be making any decisions without considering every possibility, and I hate to eye it, but Naruto seems the best choice to either bring Sasuke back, or kill him if necessary. Tsunade scowls more, but she sighs and says, all right. She turns to face the Inuzuka and says, keep checking, but make sure you get Naruto Uzumaki, Shikamaru Nara, Kiba Inuzuka, Neji Hyuga, and Choji Akamichi to the front gates first. There, I'll give them a mission briefing. Hi, Tsunade. Sama. The Inuzuka nodded his head and left the office, shutting the door behind him. After getting up and making 4 more clones, Tsunade said, Shizune, destroy 1 clone every 10 minutes, I shouldn't be long. She then flung a soldier pill into her mouth, opened a window, and leapt out. Shizune just stood there, blinking, wondering what she would do if someone showed up at the office. With a heavy sigh, Shizune sat down, and then her eyes widened a little in contemplation. What prevented Tsunade from sending for Hinata? In the meantime, with Naruto Loli, who insisted on washing the dishes for Naruto despite his protests, had finished their meal. As she washed the dishes, Loli grinned and looked out the window, knowing that Naruto didn't want to impose and that it was unfair for her to do so because she was a guest in his home, but she didn't mind because it gave her a reason to spend a little more time with him. As she hung the pot on one of the hanging hooks, Loli glanced up and noticed something on the roof next to it. Loli scowled and squinted before turning to face Naruto and saying, Naruto, I will be right back. After cleaning the table, said blonde simply nodded his head. As she made a single hand gesture and disappeared in a whirl of leaves, Loli grinned before frowning once more. With a sigh, Naruto completed clearing the table and prepared to continue where Loli had left off with the dishes. BMP, 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 but when he heard someone knocking on the door, he stopped. On the roof next to it, since they had seen Loli's expression before realizing she had noticed them, Hinata and Temari were concealing themselves. Come on. Temari stood up and took Hinata's shoulder. We need to leave this place before. Before what, little girls? Loli was staring down at them, obviously unhappy with what they had been doing, and Hinata and Temari froze in terror as they slowly looked up. As she yelled at them, Loli appeared to growl, well? After a few minutes of Temari and Hinata struggling to find the right words, Temari finally said, N. Naruto E. Escaped the hospital, S.So we followed him here in. Have spent Kami knows how long crouching here, watching him like a bunch of peeping toms, Loli concluded. N.No we were. Was the reference that made Hinata and Temari flush. Loli interrupted her conversation. You do realize that what you are doing can cause you both to be arrested, fined anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 ryo, have a restraining order placed on both of you, and that is assuming you don't suffer a 5-year prison sentence. At that realization, they both went completely white. Loli said something, so, I am giving both of you 15 seconds to leave before I haul both of you off to the police station and report you. At this point, both Tamari and Hinata were terrified, but Tamari appeared to be able to say, How are you G? Gonna do that? There is only one of you and two of us. With a sly smile, Loli lifted her hand and wiggled her fingers, exposing glistening, nearly imperceptible strings that were wound around each finger. Tamari noticed the glistening string attached to her arm when she felt a little pressure around it. Loli grinned even more and said, Any more queries? After shaking her head and stumbling to her feet, Tamari leapt to the nearby roof and left Naruto's apartment. Loli grinned and said, 5 seconds, 4, as she glanced down at Hinata. After Tamari, Hinata got up and yelled, Wait for me, and hurried after her. Loli shook her head and did a shunshin, which brought her back inside Naruto's apartment. She laughed when she saw Hinata and Tamari stumbling as they tried to get as far away from her as possible. Looks like Naruto has some stalkers, sigh, she said. Expecting to hear Naruto greet her as he usually did in such situations, Loli grinned and said, Naruto, I'm back. Silence was not what she had anticipated. Loli scowled and glanced around, saying, Naruto. Where are you, Naruto? She asked as she began to move around the apartment. Looking around the kitchen, she noticed a note on the counter and went to examine it. I apologize, but I am unsure of when I will return because I was called upon to complete a mission and there isn't any time to waste. Naruto, after reading the note multiple times, Loli leaned back against the counter and looked at the doorway, letting out a tired sigh as she lowered her head. So, this is how Naruto felt. Gates to the village. When Shikamaru, Shoji, and Neji arrived, they were just waiting for their final team member, and Naruto was already at the gates after being shunshined there by the Inuzuka who had stopped by to pick him up. They apparently did not get transported via shunshin very often, because a few moments later the Anbu returned with Kiba in tow, who was stumbling with Akamaru on his head. Pay attention. Tsunade was leaning to the side when the 5 of them abruptly turned to face her. It has been found that Sasuke Uchiha killed one genin, Sakura Haruno, and then left the village. I'm sending you to go get Sasuke and bring him back to the village, or kill him and destroy his body, because Chunin and Jonin aren't there. Does that make sense? No one raised their voice, but Naruto scowled a little. With a nod, Tsunade said, Now leave. That has Sasuke's scent on it, it should lead you straight to him, she said, throwing a kunai at Kiba, who caught it. Kiba held the kunai and sniffed it before nodding and saying, Got it. With a nod, Tsunade yelled, Get out. Kiba led the 5 genin as they fled the gates. Please be safe, Tsunade said, covering her heart as she gazed after them. Alongside Sasuke as he struggled to catch his breath, Sasuke passed out beside a tree. He tried to get to his feet, cursing, but his legs felt like jello, and he fell back down. As of right now, he can say that they have been lying because he had no idea where he was or how far he had been running. All he had been told was to meet them outside the gates so they could come get him. Many twigs beneath him snapped a crack as he tried to crawl away, cursing himself. When he reached for a knot in the nearby tree, he was abruptly lifted off the ground by strong, rough hands that grabbed his wrist. What the hell do you think you are doing this far from Konoha Genin? Sasuke asked, looking up and finding himself staring at 2 Konoha Jonin. Sasuke swore while attempting to escape. Pulling out some binding cuffs, the Jonin said, You are coming with us, we'll get our answers later. Sasuke continued to struggle in the hopes of finding a way to escape. THNK. A kunai lodged itself in his arm and the Jonin shackling him screamed. Sasuke lost his balance and fell, feeling his arms lift him off the ground and pull him roughly to the side. Both of the Jonin narrowed their eyes as they looked up, saying, You. The sound 4, Orochimaru's elite guard, were in front of the Jonin. The group's arachnid member smiled and said, How are you? A pleasant day for a walk, isn't it? The 2 Jonin swiftly assumed combat positions, prepared to strike their village's adversaries. Ooh, get in a fighting stance, I am so fucking scared you dick-licking fuckholes. The redhead practically erupted in laughter. A lady shouldn't talk like that, sighed the largest of the 4. As she sent some murderous intent off, the now named Tayuya sneered, Fuck you Jirobo. Go suck your own dick for some fat. Keep the anger Tayuya, the white-haired group member said, his voice deepening as lines began to dart across his body and his eyes gradually changing color. Change the target. When the 2 Jonin noticed the other 3 going through similar changes, their eyes grew wide. As the 4 charged at them, they had to leap back, killing intent exploding all around. Miles away from the walls of Konoha, the village where the small battalion of genin had lived their entire lives, deep in the high no Kuni forests, they set out to find Sasuke Uchiha. a renegade genin wanted for killing genin Sakura Haruno. Kiba Inuzuka led the group, followed by Neji Hyuga and Shikamaru Nara. Shoji Akamichi followed behind them, and Naruto Uzumaki, with a stern and icy expression on his face, came up behind them. As they followed Kiba, who was following Sasuke's scent, Neji used his Byakugan and said, "Kiba, is the scent getting stronger?" The other genin stopped on nearby branches and sniffed the air, looking left and right before taking a deep breath and closing his eyes. Kiba stopped on a tree branch and sniffed around. With a soft bark, Akamaru leapt onto Kiba's head after wriggling out of his jacket. "Yes, the scent leads over there," Kiba said, opening his eyes. He said, gesturing through the brush, then bounded forward. With Shikamaru taking up the rear flank with Choji, Neji swiftly switched on his Byakugan and trailed behind him. After a brief period of inaction, Naruto picked up a kunai and began to slowly follow them. Unconsciously using his Shikaku no Jutsu, Kiba pushed through the underbrush and tore through the trees, Sasuke's scent growing stronger and stronger. As Kiba's Byakugan picked up multiple chakra signatures in the trees beyond, Neji trailed behind him. Shikamaru and Choji noticed Neji stiffening up and prepared their own fighting stances. Kiba tore the bushes aside, preparing to strike, but his eyes widened in surprise and mild horror. "Dear Kami." He staggered back as the blood stench overwhelmed his enhanced senses, forcing him to let go of his Shikaku no Jutsu. Kiba made an opening, and Neji went through it first, then Shikamaru and Choji, who reacted similarly to Kiba. The bodies of two Konoha Jonin, barely breathing, were lying on the ground in broken heaps in the center of a small clearing. Their limbs were twisted, and blood was dripping from large open wounds. One of the Jonin coughed upon seeing the handful of genin, saying, "W. Who's, cough, T. There." The first of the four to gather his thoughts, Shikamaru approached the Jonin, knelt down in front of them, and said, "Genin Shikamaru, what?" After taking a deep breath, "What happened here?" W. "We were returning from a mission," cough, the Jonin gasped as they covered their open wound with their hand to try to stop the bleeding. They had to clear their throat of some blood that was still there. "We circa came upon Genin Sasuke Uchiha." The four Genin's eyes grew wide at this. After gathering his thoughts, Shikamaru said, "Tell us more." He said, "W. We cuffed him, and W. We're about to bring him back to the village, but," and the Jonin gasped for air, wheezing as they attempted to expel the blood from their lungs. Shikamaru gritted his teeth and looked down, then calmed down and asked the Jonin, "What happened?" W. "We were ambushed, B.By Orochimaru's guard, T. They attacked us too, F. Fast, for us to F. Fight back." The Jonin took a deep breath and gazed at them with dimmed eyes. I managed to grab," he said, removing his hand from the open wound to allow the blood to flow out more quickly. The dimming light in his eyes vanished as he held out his enclosed hand. With his head lowered, Shikamaru extended a hand and placed it against the Jonin's neck. No heartbeat. After letting out a sigh, Shikamaru got to his feet and said, "He's gone." He turned to face Kiba solemnly and said, "Kiba, try and find Sasuke's scent, we have to keep moving." Kiba swallowed, nodded, and started sniffing around, his face twisted in disgust each time the blood odor reached his nostrils. Shikamaru leaned down and carefully pried open the Jonin's encased hand after glancing down at it. With a look of obvious bewilderment, Shikamaru carefully picked up the object and held it up. When Choji noticed what Shikamaru was examining, he said, "A flute." Shikamaru did indeed have a flute in his hand, smeared with Jonin blood. They pressed closer and examined the flute, asking, what was the purpose of Orochimaru's guard carrying a flute? Shikamaru sighed and pocketed the flute after shaking his head and saying, "I don't know." He started to rub his forehead, but something caught his attention out of the corner of his eye. Naruto plundering the corpses of the Jonin. With wide eyes, Shikamaru exclaimed, "What the hell?" Naruto, Kiba, Neji, and Choji all turned to face Naruto in response to Shikamaru's statement. Shikamaru replied, "They won't need their equipment in the afterlife, Shikamaru," but Naruto ignored him. With a frown, Shikamaru strode towards Naruto and grabbed him by the jacket, saying, "That's not the point. Do you even know what respect the dead means?" He yelled at Naruto with rage. Taking Shikamaru's hands away, Naruto scowled at him and said, "Yes, I do. But we're shinobi, not samurai." Returning to the corpses, Naruto took a small wakizashi from the back of one of the dead Jonin and placed it on his own back before getting up and throwing the kunai pouches he had taken from the Jonin's corpses at the other genin, saying, "We don't have the luxury of respecting the dead, in case you have forgotten." He turned to Kiba and asked, you find a scent yet? Kiba turned to Naruto, blanching from the strong blood odor all around him. I think so, he said, holding his hand to his throat as if to stop a violent vomiting fit, and then pointing to a tiny pool of blood. The quantity of blood here suggests that if this is Sasuke's blood, he suffered an injury during the fight, a bad one, Neji said as he approached Kiba's point. With this much blood on him, he could not possibly walk by himself. One of Orochimaru's guards is probably carrying him. That means that they will have to slow down. Shikamaru figured out, that means we have a chance to catch up to them. He turned to Kiba and said, Kiba, see if you can find a trail. Chances are if the wound was big enough he couldn't walk on his own, then there is bound to be a blood trail, droplets or something. Kiba followed instructions, but as he sniffed the blood-soaked air, he had a visibly disgusted expression. Retrieval is no longer an option, not with Orochimaru's guard involved, Shikamaru said to the other genin as Kiba sniffed the air. With a glance at Shikamaru, Neji said, so the task is now to eliminate Sasuke Uchiha. Yes, the Sharingan is too valuable a tool for Orochimaru to obtain, the slack. Nara said, turning to face Neji. We must kill Sasuke and burn his body until every last cell is reduced to ashes after we locate them. Hey everyone. As the genin group turned to face the voice, Kiba was standing atop a branch. The blood I found is unquestionably Sasuke's. I am almost positive they went this way, he said, indicating the branch where multiple blood droplets had fallen onto a group of leaves. When Kiba pointed, the other four genin turned to face Shikamaru and asked, what do you think? According to the previously mentioned Nara, it could be a decoy. He put his hand to his chin. I beg to differ. Turning to Naruto, the four genin asked, what do you mean? With a hint of bewilderment, Shoji inquired. Although he wasn't the best student in the academy, Shoji knew the fundamentals of using and arranging decoys, and it appeared likely that in this case, the decoys would be set up to divert any potential pursuers to take a different route. Looking at Shoji, Naruto said, even for a shinobi, setting up a decoy takes a lot of time, and Orochimaru undoubtedly wants Sasuke there as soon as possible. They are unlikely to set up a decoy, wasting valuable time in the hopes of approaching the location where Orochimaru wants them to meet. Neji sighed. I cannot help but feel such thinking is short-sighted. Surely they would have wanted to delay us by making us go a different route, possibly leading us into a trap. I said they would not set up a decoy, they will however set up traps along the way. With his eyebrows slightly raised, Shikamaru looked at Naruto and asked, what do you mean? As I mentioned, setting up a decoy takes time that they probably don't have, Naruto said, glancing at them. It is much simpler to set up traps, though. Furthermore, since we are following their trail, which is undoubtedly paved with traps, we are more likely to fall for it. So, what do you think we should do? Neji said, crossing his arms. Naruto was staring at him. Isn't it obvious, we follow the trail, and don't fall for their traps like a bunch of bumbling morons. Whoa, now wait a second, I am the one who is following the blood trail, shouldn't I get a? Said Kiba, obviously upset. Kiba, they already have a lead on us, we cannot afford to try and find a secondary route, just follow the trail and watch out for traps. Naruto glanced at the other genin, in case you have forgotten. Sasuke has a lead, and we cannot allow him to give an enemy the advantage. Oh come on, there has to be a better way, maybe we can. Kiba said, gazing back at Naruto and the others. Shoji looked at Kiba sorrowfully and said, I hate to say it, Kiba, but Naruto is right. What do we do? I don't like that you are being put in such a clear danger. We cannot allow that to happen, Neji said, nodding his head in agreement. If Orochimaru gets the Sharingan, then Konoha will have a deadly foe in the future. Kiba turned to face the lone person who had not yet spoken after glancing at them. Shikamaru, you of all of us could probably see a better plan? Help me out here, man. After glancing between Kiba and the other genin, Shikamaru rubbed his forehead and sighed deeply. Mendosuke, sorry Kiba, but our options are limited. He then turned to face the Inuzuka heir and said, just, be careful. Kiba gazed at everyone in disbelief, saying, what? But, frustrated, he grabbed his hair and said, all right, come on. He then leapt into the trees and followed the trail of blood. He was followed by the other four genin, three of whom sighed in exasperation at the state of affairs. Nobody desired to be in Kiba's shoes, alongside Sasuke. After receiving a haphazard field cleaning for his wound, which typically involved inserting a sewing needle into his skin and sewing the wound shut while applying intense pressure to the injured area, Sasuke screamed in agony as he gripped his shoulder. Tayuya gave him a hard slap in response to his cry of pain, growling, pipe down you fucking piece of dog shit. Be happy I am kind enough to fix your limp dick ass, you pansy ass fuck. She tightened the thread just to be safe and got to her feet, saying, because of your stupidity I lost my flute, so consider this a bit of payback for your fuck up. She then turned and walked past Jirobo. I must say, that last sentence contained the fewest swears I've ever heard you use. Kimimaro grinned off to the side. You must be a fan of Jirobo. Fuck you spider fucker, or I'll cut open your dick and shove it up your spider ass. Tayuya sneered as he turned to face Kimimaro. With a sigh, Kimimaro said, never mind. Have we finished yet? The three Sound 4 members turned to face their final member, who was frowning a little. No shit, we're done, sneered Tayuya. The fucker stopped moaning and urinating from his pansy ass wound. Saken, can we get going? Saken looked at Kimimaro and sneered, yes, did you set up the traps as I ordered? A shimmer emanated from Kidimaru's finger as he pulled on it with a sly smile. Saken looked at Sasuke and grinned, saying, good. Can you walk on your own? With some annoyance, Sasuke glanced up at Saken and said, yes. He attempted to get up and started in the direction they were supposed to go, but Jirobo stopped him. With a smile, Kimimaro said, oh, don't worry, you won't be walking. What? Sasuke asked, glancing at them. Then why the devil did he ask me if I could walk alone? He asked, turning to Saken. In response, Kimimaro produced a bottle of black pills from his pocket and said, because kid, if you can't walk on your own, no way you are surviving the activation of the second stage of your curse mark. What is that supposed to mean? Sasuke asked, staring at them all bewildered. Speaking up, Tayuya said, the odds of surviving the stage 1 to stage 2 transition are pretty fucking low, shithead. You're not going to make it if you can't walk by yourself. So, what will it take to activate it then? Scowled Sasuke. His voice carried a hint of trepidation as he spoke. In response, Jirobo said, we must put you in a near-death situation, by which I mean that your heart must be stopped. The pills are meant to keep you alive while allowing the curse mark to properly work its way through your body. Once it's done, they will jumpstart your heart and get you back on your feet. Otherwise, you might as well be dead. Or, he paused, turning to face Sasuke. Or what? Sasuke gritted his teeth. Or it will cause your heart and all your organs to shut down from the sheer trauma of reactivation, and you will die a slow, painful, agonizing death as you feel every organ literally burst inside your own body. Saken looked down at Sasuke, and everyone looked at him. You still want this power, Uchiha boy? Looking down, Sasuke considered the risks and benefits of this decision. If this didn't work, he would die, probably in agony, which would put an end to his desire for vengeance and the Uchiha clan as a whole. However, if he survived, when did he survive? Will this power make me closer to killing Itachi? He scowled as he glanced at Saken. He grinned cruelly and sadistically and said, more than you could possibly know. Sasuke only needed that response, so he approached Kimimaro, grabbed the pills from him, and swallowed them all at once. Well, did I mention this would hurt? Saken smiled ruthlessly. Before pillars of wood surrounded his body and he was enveloped in darkness, Sasuke was unable to hear him because the pain was so intense that it felt like 1,000 hammers crashing down on him. Sighing, Jirobo rose from his kneeling position and said, the ceiling is done. Good fucking job, fat fuck, sneered Tayuya, because I didn't want to drag his limp ass back to Otogakure. If he had been free to move around, he would have slowed us down. She passed Jirobo as Kimimaro secured the barrel that now held Sasuke to his back. Come on, we're burning daylight, we need to keep moving her, Saken said, turning to look at them. Thwack. A kunai landed between Saken's feet and the Sound 4 looked up. The sight of Naruto, Shikamaru, Kiba, Neji, and Choji's faces looking down at them made them all growl. With a sly smile, Kiba held up several explosive tags attached to a number of strings and said, found you. Kimimaro looked down sheepishly as Saken growled and glared at him. Nice going on those traps, jackass. He sneered at the genin, saying, so, you're here to get your good friend back? No, Naruto said, simply staring at them before vanishing in a puff of smoke. Saken's eyes widened in surprise. Had he been speaking to Bunshin, a cage? We're here to kill him. Suddenly, Naruto appeared behind Saken, forcing him to duck under a kunai that cut off a portion of his hair. Kiba and Akamaru charged through the smoke, viciously attacking Tayuya as she was about to assist, but the ground behind her exploded, sending her flying back. Unable to even turn his head, Jirobo tried to move to assist. Kage main no jutsu, success. Kimimaro drew a kunai for each arm after spotting Shikamaru stretching his shadow to restrain Jirobo, but he jumped back when Choji hurled a barrage of kunai at him. He snarled and was about to hurl the kunai at Choji when Neji hit him from behind, causing him to scream in agony. As he repelled Naruto, Sakura observed everything that was happening. So, the genin are better than the jonin, good. He sneered at Naruto as black spots started to appear on his skin. I've been needing a warm-up, he said. Scarred by the battles of the Third Shinobi War, an open field lay empty and desolate, encircled by the vast forests of High no Kuni. On this particular day, the sun shone on this ancient battlefield without the clouds blocking it out, the trees moaning against the wind, or the leaves falling from their branches. When Minato and Kushina entered the field, they saw this scene, with a serious yet optimistic expression on their faces. So, this is where you first used the Hiraishin? Kushina asked, glancing across the field. She then turned to Minato, who was staring at the charred terrain. Minato sighed deeply as he moved forward, looking around at his former training ground and saying, yes, yes it is. Regardless of how well he concealed this location, it seemed that the Third Shinobi War had not spared even his former training ground. The trees had been cut with sword and kunai marks, and their surfaces were splattered with dried blood. The force of ninjutsu battles split, burned, and ripped the ground open. Bones protruded from the ground, picked clean by the animals that scavenged the battlefields, and the body was covered in ripped armor from when limbs and bodies were severed and bifurcated. Rusted kunai protruding from the ground were scattered across the field. In particular, Minato's Hiraishin technique prototype kunai. Minato approached a small group of the stuck kunai and leaned down to extract one from the earth. He looked at the seal matrix he had used for the kunai and smiled slightly as he straightened up. He was shocked that he didn't die from using the Hiraishin, even after using this seal matrix numerous times. What happened here? Kushina frowned as she walked across the field, observing the strewn about bones. As he dropped the old kunai, Minato turned to face Kushina and said, during the early years of the Third Shinobi War, nations such as Iwa and Kumo got closer to Konoha's borders than we had ever thought possible. We had been taken by surprise as they launched hit-and-run tactics which caused severe damage to our smaller forces, which began to affect the larger army. He said, looking at a small group of kunai, and a little laugh came out of his mouth. I was actually standing right here, when a conjoined battalion from Kumogakure and Iwagakure found this place. That was the first time I ever used the Hiraishin in combat, it was also the first time I ever killed. Minato. Koi, Kushina said, placing a hand on Minato's shoulder. Anyway, Hana either left a clue here, or, Minato said, letting out a sigh and surveying the area. Maybe she hid the last two documents here? Kushina asked, her eyes widening with a glimmer of hope. Minato sighed and looked around the training field, saying, yes, maybe, all she gave us as a clue was my old Hiraishin kunai. The question is, where did she hide it? Maybe she placed something on the kunai itself, something to give us a clue. Kushina said, putting a hand to her chin with a contemplative look on her face. It was definitely possible, Minato nodded. He took out the kunai from inside his cloak and examined it. Naturally, the blade was rusted, but he saw something strange about it that had previously escaped his notice. A symbol, one that bore striking resemblance to the notes that Hana's coding had created. When Kushina noticed this, she took the sheet containing her coding out of her pocket. Glancing across the page, she grinned and said, it is a series of coding. What? Minato asked, glancing at her. It is part of a series, the symbol on the kunai is the first of 12. Kushina looked over the field and said to Minato, maybe there are other kunai in the field that have the remaining symbols? The symbol on the paper looked exactly like the one on the kunai. Kushina and Minato both agreed with her reasoning and started scanning the training field. When he discovered groups of kunai, Minato knelt down and started to pick them up one by one. He examined each one, dusting off the blades in an attempt to locate the symbols. Kushina was following suit, but after exploring the kunai strewn field for 30 minutes, she turned to Minato and moaned, I cannot find a single kunai that has a single symbol on them aside from your old seal matrix. She grabbed her hair in exasperation, growled angrily, and started to pace angrily back and forth. It wasn't until her foot hit the lone kunai protruding from the ground that she noticed it. The kunai remained as solid as a mountain in the sand, but she toppled over. When Minato saw her fall, he rushed to her side and caught her before she hit the upward pointing kunai. Kushina, are you okay? He asked, looking at her worriedly. Yes, I am fine, Kushina moaned as she slowly got to her feet and looked around. What tripped me? Minato frowned as he looked in the direction of the kunai. Seeing his eyes, Kushina turned to face the kunai and said, that. But it is barely a centimeter in the ground, she said, turning to face him. She leaned over and grasped the hilt, asking, how so? Kushina attempted to remove the kunai from the ground but discovered that it was fixed in place. What the? She exerted more force, but all she accomplished was to disturb the sand close to her feet. Kushina halted her attempt to raise the kunai and examined it intently. Her eyes slightly widened when she noticed a symbol on the blade's surface that matched the one in Hana's coating. Kushina looked at Minato and said, Minato.koi, look. Waiting seals, Minato leaned down and followed instructions, and his own eyes widened as well, not just because of the symbol, but also because of the second seal matrix on the kunai. He gently grasped the kunai's hilt, which remained in place. Hana must have applied these seals as well as the symbols, but why? He looked over at Kushina, who was studying the kunai. Alternatively, the kunai's posture was deliberate. There was a reason it was arranged that way. The question was, what was the intended function? Kushina looked up, her eyes focused on the strewn about kunai, and she noticed a number of other kunai standing in the same spot. She got to her feet, approached each kunai, and examined the blades. The symbol in Hana's coating was present in all of them. Kushina turned to Minato with a smile and said, Minato.koi, I think the pose of the kunai has a meaning. Gazing down at the kunai, she said, each one is weighted down, keeping its position fixed, and each one has the symbols in Hana's coating on them. After giving the kunai a quick glance, Minato smiled and said, Kushina, you are brilliant. He got up and approached Kushina, tripping over one of the kunai but managing to straighten himself before falling. As Kushina watched Minato topple over, his arms flailing everywhere, she burst out laughing. Okay, keep laughing, Minato sighed and scowled. He looked around and said, now we just need to find all the kunai, and try and figure out the significance of their pose. He straightened himself and said, let's start looking. You look over there, I'll look over here, Kushina nodded, gesturing behind her. Kushina turned to look where she had decided, and Minato nodded before turning to search the area she had indicated. Only for them to become motionless as a chilling, foreboding wind brushed against their flesh. And they sensed a terrible presence that they all too well recall as being the core of Kyuubi no Yoko. Their eyes widened in horror as their heads shot upwards and turned in the direction where they had sensed the Kyuubi's dark Yuki. As they felt the Kyuubi's power, they knew one thing for sure. They had noted the directions of Iwagakure, Sunagakure, the coast, and Kanahagakure on their way here. They had done this for obvious reasons, knowing where they were, knowing which way potential enemies came from, and being able to quickly flee if they were ambushed. Naruto was nowhere near Konoha, let alone in it. When Kushina realized this, her eyes widened in horror. Kami no, Sochi. And she launched herself in the direction where the Kyuubi's Yuki had been detected. Breaking out of his daze, Minato rushed after Kushina, tearing up the ground around him as he attempted to catch up with his wife while applying a lot of chakra to his feet. He would have seen that his actions had unearthed a small box, but there was no hinge that would have opened it, no seam that would have revealed a lid, just a single sentence, a piece of a riddle, had he turned around as the dust and sand cloud dissipated. This is the first path you are looking for. Continue east until you come to the arch that looks over the tree. Alongside Naruto encased in a crimson cloak of bubbling red energy, Naruto flew through the air, smashing through 3 trees before landing on the forest floor, the broken tree limbs softening his impact. He sat up slowly, moaned in agony, and snarled toward his opponent, who was severely injured. Saken, whose entire body was marked with curse marks, was snarling at him and gripping the stump where his arm had been. Following Saken's removal of the curse seal, the others followed suit, pushing back against the genin and concentrating on Naruto, who was the bigger threat among the genin. They used their first stage of the curse seal to attack him, pushing him back until he had to summon the Kyuubi's chakra. Naruto then managed to push back against them and tore off Saken's arm after being hit by a hidden strike from what he believed to be the tumor on Saken's back. It turned out to be his twin brother, Yukon. It appears that their Kekkei Genkai permitted the 2 brothers to share a body without any negative consequences. At the very least, the way they kicked him through 3 trees demonstrated that the negative consequences had no effect on their ability to fight. Get the brat to Orochimaru. Sama, I'll keep these pests away. Saken sneered and snapped his head toward the remaining Sound 4. Don't have to tell me twice, fucker. Tayuya moaned as she got to her feet, favoring her right leg, and snatched up the barrel that held the Uchiha before darting into the woods. Kitamura and Jirobo pursued her, shielding her ass. Naruto growled and was ready to leap after them when Saken suddenly materialized in front of him. Saken kicked him hard in the jaw, sending him flying in the direction of the other genin, who had gathered together while Naruto was the target of the Sound 4. Shikamaru swiftly assisted Naruto in standing up while glancing at Saken and the slowly developing Yukon. As the two brothers were tearing themselves apart, the curse marks on their skin darkened as they entered their second stage. Shikamaru stopped Naruto just as he was about to attack. "Go, finish the mission," Shikamaru said, glancing at Naruto. He then scowled at Sasuke and Yukon and said, "I'll keep them at bay." "Are you crazy?" Naruto scowled. "What are your chances of defeating them after they threw me through multiple trees?" "None, but I can stall them long enough for you guys to finish your mission," Shikamaru said, looking back at Naruto, as he stood in front of the other genin and placed himself between Sasuke and Yukon. "Go, I won't be able to hold them forever." After nodding his head, Naruto took off after the other members of the Sound Four. Neji and Kiba followed him. "Still," Choji said, "Shikamaru?" Nara merely grinned and said, "Don't worry, Choji. I'll be all right." Choji nodded his head, swallowed, and bounded off after the others. With a sigh, Shikamaru glanced up at the two brothers who had completely changed and were mocking him. Sasuke laughed and said, "You are a terrible liar," in a demonic tone. One by one, Shikamaru cracked his fingers and lowered himself slowly. "Who said I was lying?" "We did, because you won't be leaving this place alive, pest," sneered Yukon. Sasuke and Yukon suddenly charged at Shikamaru, leaping at him with their clawed hands bared and swinging them with a deadly intent that was evident in their movements. Shikamaru had shot through hand seals at the same time, landing on the bird hand sign. Kage Nui no Jutsu, alongside Kushina and Minato. With such determination and speed, Kushina tore through the forest, even tearing through a branch that stood in her path without ever drawing her blades. She sped through the trees and continued on her way. Minato trailed closely behind, attempting to locate a second sign of the Kyuubi's Yuki using a sensory ninjutsu. Kushina tore through the trees and skidded to a stop when she reached the rim of a huge hill that overlooked the high no-kuni forests nearby. A number of stones were scattered all over the hill. Kushina searched over the hill, but she was unable to locate any indication of where she had sensed the Kyuubi's Yuki. Panting, Minato emerged behind her and said, "Kushina, are you seeing anything?" Kushina's lips were pressed together as she snapped at him, displaying her extreme agitation. Seeking something, Minato peered over the edge himself. Nothing. Kushina paced back and forth in an attempt to detect anything that might indicate the location of her Sochi. Minato was following suit. After a few minutes of nothingness, which felt like hours to them, Kushina yelled, "Ah!" and slammed her foot into the ground below, tearing it apart with spider web cracks. Minato, who was doing marginally better than Kushina, leapt back in surprise. There were no new bursts of Kyuubi's Yuki that either of them could detect. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, Minato scowled as he started to run through hand seals before stopping. There were 4 more Minatos when the clouds of smoke that had exploded outward subsided. When Kushina noticed this, she nodded her head, followed suit, and produced an additional 6 Kushinas. After Minato and Kushina gave the clones a nod, they leapt down from the mountaintop and went in pursuit of Naruto. Once they located him, they would dispel their presence, and Minato and Kushina would rush forward. Minato and Kushina also leapt from the peak, kicking up dirt next to a stone. If they hadn't been so preoccupied with Naruto, they would have noticed that the stones formed an arch. Another black box, similar to the one in the old training ground, was hidden in the dirt. It also had writing on it. "The second path is here. You must be shown the next path forward. The river is flowing as swiftly as light, and the water is falling quickly below." Alongside Naruto, Kimimaro appeared to be producing kunai in quantities that should be impossible to carry without a sealing scroll, so Naruto bounded through the trees, dodging them as he did. Kiba, Neji, and Choji were trying their hardest to stay away. Kimimaro, meanwhile, sneered as he attempted to slow down or possibly kill the approaching genin with a volley of his kunai. With a burst of chakra at his feet, Naruto shot at the person holding the barrel containing Sasuke, Tsuyu, as soon as he saw his impending attacks. Jirobo anticipated this and leapt into Naruto's path to save Tsuyu and, consequently, Sasuke. Jirobo, the larger member of the Sound Four, was knocked out cold when Naruto crashed into him. Seeing this, Kimimaro aimed at Naruto and hurled a kunai quickly and straight at the blonde Jinchuriki's head. Jirobo attempted to hit the blonde, placing his hand squarely in the kunai's path, but he had not witnessed Kimimaro toss the kunai. Jirobo exclaimed in agony, "Squelch, og," as he grabbed his hand and let himself drop to the ground. The Jirobo slammed into the ground with amazing force, but Naruto was able to land on his feet and leap out of his way. "I'm going to make you pay for that." Jirobo sneered and glared at Kimimaro before turning to face Naruto. In a blind fit of rage, he tore the kunai from his hand and charged at Naruto. When Naruto noticed Jirobo approaching, he waited for him to approach sufficiently. Hirobo's body was marked in black, and he swung the arm that held the kunai. With his legs bent inward, Naruto abruptly kicked his feet out from under him, allowing gravity to pull him closer to the ground before launching them outward. Making contact with Jirobo's knee areas, he screamed in agony, "Ra-Aghhh," as his knees cracked and bent completely backward, causing him to buckle and topple over. Naruto stopped his fall by reaching back with his arms as he fell forward, bending his knees once more and shooting at Jirobo. His left leg slammed into Hirobo's throat, while his right leg smashed Jirobo in the face. Jirobo gurgled as he gasped for air and lost his vision, sent flying back and upward. He collapsed onto his back, gasping and choking as he clutched at his throat, struggling to breathe in enough oxygen while in excruciating pain. Kimimaro snarled and his eyes widened as he prepared another volley of kunai, but Kiba and Choji simultaneously struck him in the side. As Kiba stepped firmly into Kimimiro's chest as they descended, the three shinobi fell to the ground, with Choji doing the same to Kimimiro's abdomen and Kimimaro crashing into the ground below. "They can handle them, we have to complete the mission, let's go." Neji jumped in front of Naruto as he was about to attack Jirobo again. He then followed Tayuya into the trees. Naruto turned to face Kiba and Choji, who were now viciously assaulting the defeated Kimimaro without allowing him to move. Then, turning back toward the path taken by Neji and Tayuya, Naruto leapt into the trees. While Choji smashed his fists into Kimimiro's abdomen, Kiba withdrew a kunai and slammed it into Kimimiro's chest. Jirobo, who was off to the side, had overcome the pain and turned to face Kiba and Choji. His face twisted into a snarl as the curse mark spread throughout his body. His throat was more or less healed, and he started to slowly raise himself off the ground as his legs trembled and trembled as the curse mark spread. His legs then painfully bent back into place. Panting, Kiba swung the kunai and slashed the blade into Kimimiro's chest once more. However, before he could deliver a fatal blow, he caught a glimpse of a charging Jirobo. He moved swiftly, pushing Choji aside and leaping out of the way himself. "I am going to enjoy tearing your limbs off and gorging myself on your entrails," Jirobo roared at Kiba and Choji, his voice echoing like a demon, after accidentally killing Kimimaro. The spider, like member of the Sound 4, was trampled to death by the curse mark. "Not today, fat ass." Kiba snarled and snapped his fingers, causing Akamaru to leap out of his coat and change into his battle form. As Choji sprinted through hand seals and exclaimed, "Nikuden Sensha," in a cloud of smoke, his body grew rotund and he shot in Hirobo's direction. "Gatsuga!" Kiba and the changed Akamaru hurled at Jirobo. When Jirobo noticed the approaching blows, he roared and extended both hands to his sides, fending off the two shinobi's blows. The impact caused the forest to tremble, and a cloud of sand and dirt rose into the air, which was noticed by a passing Kushina clone, which then dispelled itself. Alongside Kushina, when Kushina's eyes opened, she halted atop a tree and looked in the direction where her dispelled clone had seen the sand and dirt cloud. A pillar of sand and dirt rose into the sky as Kushina turned her head. Kushina hurried over to the pillar of sand without pausing for a second. She uttered the words, "Sochi," and ran through the woods, determined to make sure her son was safe. Three figures stood in distinct positions deep within High no Kuni's forests. One was on his knees, his hands in the bird sign, while the other two were standing right in front of him, reaching out to touch him. As the curse mark completely disappeared, their skin returned to normal, and a pool of blood formed beneath the two standing figures, dripping from the wounds in their bodies caused by the black shadows that had pierced through their vital organs. Shikamaru Nara, who was on his knees, let go of the hand sign he was holding while panting heavily. Then, as the shadows that had been holding them in place completely disappeared, the two figures toppled over, their lifeless bodies splattering into the pool of blood below. With a heavy sigh, Shikamaru collapsed onto his back, his breathing slowing as the sudden use of the Kage Nui no Jutsu, a jutsu he had been training for months to use in battle, burned his chakra coils. "I guess I need more practice," he said, laughing quietly. Chakra exhaustion was evident from the burn on his coils. He didn't think he was useful until the burn subsided, and even then, he wouldn't be useful unless he was used as support. He sighed heavily and started to slowly push himself up, squirming in agony as the burn on his coils grew worse. When he eventually got up on his own, he limped slowly to a nearby tree and collapsed against it. Alongside Kiba and Choji, while their attacks ground against Hirobo's palms, Choji and Kiba persisted in their assault, but he had not moved an inch. As they pushed their attack, Choji and Kiba were clenching their teeth in agony, but it appeared that they would be unable to break Hirobo's hide no matter what they did. Jirobo gave them a mean smile when he saw how hard they were trying to attack. As he repelled the two genins' attack, the Goliath of the Sound Four started to close his hands. Kiba and Choji attempted, but were unsuccessful, to resist the pressure that was being applied to them. They had used up all of their chakra and had nothing left to offer. Ha ha ha. You filthy, miserable chunks of trash. Jirobo roared in laughter as he felt this. His fists clenched tightly, snapping so violently that his chakra crashed into Kiba's and Choji's attacks, sending them flying into the surrounding trees. There was a loud crack as Choji collided with the low-lying branches. His jaw or skull had undoubtedly fractured. Kiba crashed into a tree trunk, but he was unlucky enough to have gone straight for a low-lying branch, which pierced his shoulder all the way through. Ah! He hissed in agony as he felt the wood rip through his flesh and blood start to flow from the wound. Akamaru had been knocked out after colliding with a nearby stone. Jirobo grunted as he started to let his curse seal fade, then turned to face the fallen genin and snorted with disdain. You know, I should be getting back to my comrades, but, he said, looking at Choji, who was barely breathing, and a twisted smile appeared on his lips. I am a little peckish. I suppose they won't mind if I have a little snack first. He started to approach Akamaru, licking his lips as a wave of chakra erupted from his fist, as his curse mark started to spread once more in response to his malevolent hunger. When Kiba realized this, he started to thrash painfully while attempting to break the branch he was suspended from. He cursed as he experienced the effects of the blood loss, dizziness, and weightlessness in his body. Jirobo smirked as he stood beside Choji and turned to face Kiba, saying, Oh, don't worry, after I am done with Fatass here, you're next. He swung his hand down and took Choji by the hair, lifting him up without showing much concern for his health. He smiled as he felt his chakra slowly drain while little was left of Choji's chakra. With a savage smile, Jirobo exposed his teeth and proceeded to bite a sizable piece of Choji's flesh. Shink. Before his vision quickly darkened, Jirobo felt a sharp pain in his neck, which caused him to freeze. Even as he fought to stay awake, Kiba gazed at the scene in front of him with morbid fascination, his eyes as wide as saucers. As Hirobo's body abruptly collapsed, releasing the depleted form of Choji, Kushina stood beside him with her sword drawn and her skin covered in a thin layer of blood. A thin red line appeared on Hirobo's neck, and then his head abruptly fell off its previous position. Ah! Kiba exclaimed as he felt himself being pulled off the branch, a painful stabbing tearing through his body, but he was too focused to notice Minato arrive and run to his side. Naruto. Where is he? Kushina asked, her eyes hardening as she quickly sheathed her sword and ran to Kiba, kneeling down. What? Kiba said, gazing at Kushina. Where is my son, now? Kushina asked Kiba, her eyes appearing to turn to stone. They went that way. Kiba stammered out, flinching in shock, pointing to the direction he had last seen Naruto and Neji go. After a quick glance in the direction Kiba indicated, Kushina turned back to face him and asked, You're certain? As the Yondaime dressed his wound, Kiba nodded quickly, saying, Yes, I am positive. As he closed the wound, Minato sighed and said, This will slow the bleeding, but if you don't get medical attention soon, you are going to die. What? Kiba's eyes widened. Kage Bunshi no Jutsu. Kushina grunted as she hurled the hand signals, creating two distinct Kushinas. Minato followed suit, and one of the Minatos swiftly seized Kiba, while another Kushina grabbed Akamaru and Choji. Go back to the village and dispel yourself upon arrival, Kushina said, glancing at her clones. Minato's clone trailed closely behind the clones as they nodded and returned to the village. Before Minato could respond, Kushina had already sprinted toward the trees with enough force to break the ground beneath her, having turned in the direction Kiba had directed them. Minato hurried after her as they set out to locate their son. In the meantime, as she leapt through the trees and her assailants closed in on her, Tsuyu swore. She glanced back for a moment and saw Naruto make two clones, which he then used to launch himself like a missile at her. As he flew at her, Naruto drew a kunai and swung it forcefully. Just in time to avoid a deadly blow, Tsuyu moved out of the way. She pulled out her own kunai and threw them at Naruto, saying, Ga, you son of a cunt. Her reward was a long, deep gash along her cheek. Most of them were barely out of Naruto's way, but one kunai managed to lodge itself in his shoulder and slow him down. With a sly smile, Tsuyu turned to face her goal, only to discover that Neji had interrupted her and was already preparing the Hake Rokuhuion Sho technique. Tsuyu's eyes widened, and she made an unsuccessful attempt to dodge. Two palms. Neji said as he struck her twice. Tsuyu fell back, staggered painfully. Neji rushed forward and slammed 4 palms twice more. Tayuya's arms went numb, and she let out a painful cry. 8 palms. Neji hit 4 more times, pressing his advantage. Tayuya felt the barrel's weight on her back and was barely able to stand. 16 palms. Was sounded 8 more times by Neji, who refused to give up. 32 palms. Neji continued to attack Tayuya, hitting her 16 more times as she began to slowly fall back. Neji continued to press his attack even as Tayuya started to fall toward the forest floor. He finished with another 30.2 strikes, 64 palms. The last blow struck her so hard that it sent her flying into the forest floor, leaving an imprint of her body as the barrel flew off in mid-air. With a savage glare at her, Naruto jumped into the clearing and drew the kunai that Tayuya had struck him with before turning to face the barrel. He clenched his fist around the kunai and started to stalk forward. Neji leapt to the ground and stood over Tayuya, who whimpered and moaned in agony as Neji's attack damaged her tenketsu. When Naruto eventually found himself facing the barrel, he grabbed one of the seal tags and prepared to tear it off. Gah! Naruto's eyes widened at what he saw, and he abruptly turned around when he heard Neji scream in agony. A man with white hair and pale skin was holding Neji in midair. He was dressed very much like the other members of the Sound Four. The most peculiar aspect, though, was the white bone protruding from the man's wrist, which he was using to hold Neji in midair. Before the man threw Neji aside and sent him crashing to the ground, Neji swore as he felt the bone pierce through his shoulder. Naruto swore when he saw the man sprinting toward him while a longer, sharper piece of bone protruded from his wrist. Naruto swung his kunai at the man's stomach after quickly ducking under the oncoming blow. As a layer of bone abruptly emerged from the man's chest, shielding the abdomen, it broke upon contact. The man kicked Naruto hard before he could react, sending him crashing into a tree far from the barrel. After scowling, the man turned to face the barrel, snatched it up, and then leapt into the woods. Snarling, "Oh no you don't," Naruto hurriedly pushed himself up and followed the man into the trees. Tayuya was left sprawled in the center of the forest floor as Neji followed behind him, cursing as he covered his wound and used what little medical jutsu he knew to gradually heal it. The white-haired man outran Naruto and Neji as he ran through the woods, but he was still able to shoot back volley after volley of projectiles made from his finger bones. As fast as they could, Naruto and Neji avoided that, with some of them grazing them, which made Neji slow down. "Naruto!" Neji exclaimed as he turned to face Naruto and recalled how Naruto had launched him at Tayuya using his clones. "What?" Naruto asked, glaring at Neji as he ducked beneath a branch. Neji said loudly, "I got a plan. I need you and one of your clones to toss me at him, quickly." After giving a nod, Naruto swiftly made another clone. While the clone grasped Naruto's leg, Naruto grabbed Neji's arms. Then, using a whip-like motion, the clone swung Naruto, and Naruto swung Neji. Letting go, Naruto launched Neji at the white-haired man and prepared a chakra-filled palm strike. Unaware of the impending assault, the man's upper back was struck, sending him, Neji, and the barrel hurtling through the trees into an open field. The barrel broke on impact, sending Sasuke tumbling away, still appearing to be unconscious. Neji had to roll out of the way of a slash from the man's bone blade as he stood up, and he winced in agony as he felt his wound reopen. Neji was fighting the white-haired man when Naruto leapt through the tree line, and it was obvious that he would not be able to hold his own for very long. A glimpse of movement flickered in the corner of Naruto's eye as he squinted and prepared to charge forward. His gaze shifted to the movement, and his eyes grew wide. Sasuke was moving to the side, a dark chakra pulsing from his body. As if unhindered, the Uchiha started to stand. The Uchiha glanced up, and Naruto and Sasuke's gazes briefly locked before Sasuke abruptly turned and ran into the trees. With a curse, Naruto turned to watch Neji keep up the battle against the bone wielder with white hair. Sasuke escaped if he stayed and assisted Neji, but Neji would undoubtedly die if he got Sasuke. Naruto scowled before turning to face Sasuke and running away. He had a task to finish. Even as Naruto departed, Neji persisted in attacking the man with the white hair. He had hoped Naruto would have stayed to help him, but he was aware of what would happen if Orochimaru managed to capture Sasuke. Neji had to pull out all the stops, use every bit of Juken he knew, and hope he lived long enough for reinforcements to arrive, but the white-haired man persisted in his attack with seemingly limitless bone weapons. Neji was abruptly struck by the white-haired man with a hidden bone blade, which sliced off his headband and slashed across his face, scratching through the middle of his cheek. Blood trickled down the side of Neji's face as he felt his headband come off and pedaled back. Staring at Neji, the white-haired man said, "A Hyuga of the branch family." Neji scowled as the enemy saw his curse seal exposed without his headband. "Your skill as a servant is becoming," the white-haired man said, putting his arm out as another blade emerged from his palm and then firmly grasping it. "As a sign of respect, from one servant to another, I shall give you my name, Kimimaro, last of the Kagaya." With an angry look in Kimimaro's direction, Neji growled, "I am no servant." The silence was deafening as the two stared at one another, and then, as the wind blew by, they moved and hit. In the meantime, Tayuya, as the pain roared through her body, Tayuya lay there for what seemed like hours, staring up at the sky and trying to reach for something to grab onto in order to pull herself out of the crater. A foot suddenly slammed onto her hand, breaking several of her fingers as she screamed in agony, "Once I get out of this fucking hole, I am going to fucking kill those cuntbags and slit their throats and ah." When Tayuya looked up to see who had the audacity to attack her, she winced. Then, she gasped as a hand grabbed her throat, lifting her off the ground and allowing her to look directly into Kushina Uzumaki Namikaze's eyes. Gripping the girl, Kushina said, "I am going to ask you only once, where is my Sochi? ID. Don't know who I. Your fucking Sochi is you bitch," Tayuya exclaimed in agony. When Minato eventually caught up to Kushina, he approached her while gasping for air. When Tayuya saw the Yondaime, her eyes widened. "Oh, I think you do, little bitch." Kushina slammed Tayuya into the ground and pushed hard on her throat, saying, "Which direction did they go?" Kushina pulled out her sword and slammed it, point first, right next to Tayuya's throat, saying, "Now." Kushina and Minato did not ignore this. For the first time in a long time, Tayuya felt genuine, unadulterated fear as she looked up at Kushina and saw the murderous, hateful expression in her eyes. "They went that way," she exclaimed. After looking where Tayuya indicated, Kushina turned to face Tayuya and said, "If you were lying," but left the last part unsaid as she released Tayuya. Before Tayuya could even rise, Minato stepped forward and quickly applied a series of 7 seals to her. "You try and remove those seals, and there won't be enough left of you to feed an ant, do you understand me?" he said, his voice having a savage and malevolent edge. With a quiet gaze on the Yondaime, Tayuya swallowed and said, "See? Crystal," in a squeaky voice. After getting up and starting to leave, Minato made a shadow clone and seized Tayuya as they made their way back to Konoha, while Kushina and Minato followed her instructions. While they were leaving, Tayuya gazed at them and said, "Oh fuck me." In other places, after racing through the trees at speeds he could never have imagined before, Sasuke found himself standing atop the head of a massive statue. In a matter of minutes, he was speeding through the trees at a rate that made it feel like time was moving slowly, and he was not even aware of his own fatigue. He seemed to have no boundaries, and this was just a hint of what Orochimaru had in store for him. He would soon get his retribution. He glanced around and found himself gazing at a location he had never heard of before. Shimatsu no Tani, the Valley of the End, where Madara Uchiha and Hashirama Senju fought to the death and destroyed the valley itself, demonstrating the strength of the Uchiha clan and, unfortunately, the Senju as well. However, he thought it appropriate that the statue of Hashirama Senju, where all lesser men and women should be in his eyes, was beneath his heel as he gazed across the valley toward the statue of Madara Uchiha. As he noticed his new life and the high no Kuni border just beyond the valley, Sasuke started to move forward. Sasuke, however, as he and Naruto plummeted towards the water below, he was tackled from behind. After launching an elbow that smashed into Naruto's ribs, Sasuke turned mid-fall and started punching and kicking Naruto. In return, Naruto grabbed Sasuke by the shirt and gave him a forceful blow before finishing with a headbutt. Before they both fell into the water below, Sasuke's head painfully jerked back as he and Naruto split apart in the fall. The force of the two falling into the water caused it to explode upward and outward, and a huge wave swept across the valley's statue's feet. Sasuke pulled himself out of the water first, and Naruto did the same shortly after. Sasuke growled, "You can't make me go back to Konoha, Naruto," as the two gazed at each other. As he stood up, Naruto scowled and cracked his neck before assuming a fighting stance and declaring, "I have no intention to even try." "So, you've been ordered to kill me?" Sasuke asked, his eyes widening a little before narrowing. Without saying a word, Naruto merely glared at Sasuke, who got up and assumed his own fighting stance. As the curse mark quickly spread across his body, Sasuke snarled and charged forward, adopting the Uchiha clan fighting stance. "You're going to have to work for your kill," he said, activating his Sharingan. A tiny quantity of the Kyuubi's Yuki started to slowly leak out of Naruto's body as he charged forward as well. They skidded to a stop in front of the statues of Konoha's founders after their fists collided in the center of the two statues, sending them both flying backwards in a shockwave. Both of them could see that the other was staring at them. Of them, only one would survive in this valley. Alongside Kushina and Minato, along with the explosion of Kyuubi's Yuki, Kushina and Minato also sensed a tainted, foul, and dark chakra. It was obviously inferior to the Kyuubi's Yuki, despite being so repulsive and disgusting. Nevertheless, they sensed it. Minato and Kushina accelerated their pace and moved toward their son, where they sensed the demonic chakra erupting. With Kimimaro and Neji during their clan technique dance, Neji and Kimimaro used the Hyuga Juken, which he had reverse engineered by secretly replicating each technique after witnessing the main branch use it and adapting it to his own fighting style. When Kimimaro was using Kagaya clan techniques, Orochimaru's teachings had corrupted them, making them more lethal and unpredictable. Byakugan in a death dance against Shikatsumiku. Neji dodged a round kick from Kimimaro and hit the Kagaya's inner thigh with 7 palm strikes to disable his lower body at the same time. Seeing through this strategy, Kimimaro leapt into the air, dodging the blow, and swung down his hand, holding a sharp bone knife that Neji just managed to sidestep, severing multiple hairs. Neji leapt back and hurled a hail of shuriken at Kimimaro, who swatted them away with his bone mesh covered hand before lunging forward and attacking Neji with a weaving serpent-like skill. An obvious indication of Orochimaru's teachings. Unfortunately, Neji was unable to prevent this, but he was able to deliver his own blow, which struck Kimimaro's right lung and seriously damaged it. Neji, on the other hand, was fortunately spared the major organs, suffering multiple smaller but still severe wounds to his chest and abdomen. This didn't really matter because he had already suffered enough physical harm and was rapidly losing ground to Orochimaru's servant who wielded a bone. When Kimimaro noticed that Neji was slowing down, he scowled and said, "I see you are losing the ability to stand against me." He coughed up blood and said, "As. Shame really, I had hoped my final fight would have been far more memorable than this." He then started to slowly turn away and head in the direction that Sasuke and Naruto had gone. When Neji saw this, he exclaimed, "You are not leaving," and started to sprint forward, preparing a second palm strike to hit Kimimaro in the back. Kimimaro's head turned slightly as he saw Neji sprint toward him in a clear attack. All Kimimaro did was lift his hand, aim it at Neji, and shoot a barrage of finger bones. Hakasho Kaden. Neji yelled as soon as he saw them coming, and he twisted on his feet just in time to use the Hyuga family rotation and send Kimimaro's projectiles flying back at him. As he flipped back, Kimimaro's eyes widened. He was able to avoid 3 of his projectiles, but the other 2 stuck in his abdomen in the middle of the flip and shot through his body, surprisingly missing his vital organs except for the lung, which was already damaged. After using such a chakra-intensive technique, Neji's damaged body found it difficult to stay upright, so he slowed his rotation and fell. Before turning to face Neji, Kimimaro said, "I was mistaken, Hyuga. I suppose my last fight in this life will be a memorable one." As he spoke, the sclera of his eyes darkened and his skin started to crawl with black lines that gradually covered his skin. Kimimaro had landed on his own feet, but blood was now starting to pour out of the 2 holes in his abdomen that he had unintentionally allowed himself to sustain. Neji saw the holes in Kimimaro's abdomen close as the markings spread across his skin, and he swore as he forced himself to stand, barely able to do so. With his body nearly completely covered in black markings, Kimimaro stood tall and said, "I will no longer hold back, Hyuga. I hope you have the courtesy to do the same." He started to advance as the markings completely covered his skin, turning his once pale skin brown as a repulsive tail emerged from his spine and multiple spikes that resembled bones emerged from his back. An overwhelming sense of despair ripped through Neji's body. Neji attempted to stand while witnessing Kimimaro's disgusting metamorphosis. He saw the once pale, skinned slave of Orochimaru turn darker, with repulsive bone protuberances emerging from his back and a repulsive tail whipping back and forth while the Kagaya gazed at him with those terrible eyes. His iris turned sickly yellow, almost golden, and his eye whites turned black as night. "Look upon me, Hyuga. This is the might that Orochimaru Sama has granted me. You see the height of what his gifts have given me." Now, Kimimaro blinked once as he looked at Neji, and he took a deep breath before letting out a long, shallow breath. His pupils dilated as a look of malice crossed his face. "Show me what your masters have given you, Hyuga." When he eventually got to his feet, Neji cursed, but his legs trembled because the fight's damage made it difficult to stand. After appearing to become agitated, Kimimaro leaned over and swung his fist in a devastating hook at Neji, saying, "Fine then, if I must, I will strike first, Hyuga." Unable to dodge the blow, Neji's lower jaw was struck by the hook punch, which separated it from his upper jaw and sent him flying sideways. He then crashed into the ground and skidded until a big stone embedded in the ground stopped him. Before moving forward, Kimimaro scowled and glanced at Neji. "Hyuga, I had hoped that you would put up more of a fight. But it would appear I was mistaken," he said, standing over Neji and pressing his foot against his already broken lower jaw, which caused him to scream in agony. "No matter," he said, looking down at his right hand and observing a bone spike that was as long as a short sword and had a sharpened edge. Kimimaro swung the bone sword down, aiming it at Neji's throat, and said, "I will allow your suffering to be mercifully quick." Clang! The twisted Kagaya was sent flying backwards by a strong kick that broke his ribcage, but it stopped when another blade parried it. After flying a considerable distance away, he struck a tree hard enough to shatter it and send it toppling over onto the Kagaya, seemingly bringing him to an end. Even though he was in excruciating pain, Neji saw the scene and his eyes widened. He then turned his head and let out another cry as he felt his jaw further loosen. Kushina, meanwhile, was standing over him with her leg outstretched, and Minato was standing beside her. After kneeling and looking down at Neji, Minato made a series of hand gestures, and two clones materialized next to him. He told them to take him back to Konoha, now. He then got up and turned to Kushina, saying, "Let's go." The two of them turned in the direction where they had detected the Kyuubi's chakra after Kushina nodded her head. No, when they sensed a huge chakra output, the two abruptly stopped, and their heads snapped in the direction of the energy. They witnessed Kimimaro running through hand signals while still in his monstrous form and panting heavily, despite having half of his body pinned beneath the tree. His eyes appeared to light up with chakra as he completed the hand sign and said, "Suwarabi no Mai." As more bone spikes erupted, the effect was immediate, with sharpened bone spines shooting out of the ground with such force that spiderweb cracks shattered through the earth. As the bone spikes started to emerge from beneath Kushina and Minato, they had just a moment to act. With each movement, the rising spikes seemed to be focusing on them as they dove in and out of them. Minato narrowly avoided being immobilized by a spike that would have pierced his thigh. Meanwhile, Kushina was weaving in and out of the narrow gaps made by the bones with her slender and supple body. As it fled back to Konoha, the clone carrying Neji had just managed to avoid the bones. It glanced back for a moment before sprinting forward, determined to carry out its orders. Minato and Kushina continued to dodge the bones, narrowly escaping multiple near misses that, had they not been fast enough, might have left them defenseless. The two shinobi were cornered in a ragged area with bone all around them when the bones abruptly stopped their attack, causing them to both skid to a halt. After glancing around, Kushina scowled at their current situation. They were surrounded. They couldn't even climb because the bones had started to bend, forming a ceiling of sorts that made it difficult to get out. When Minato realized this, he muttered a curse. He couldn't possibly get a Hiraishin kunai through the bone ceiling to get him and Kushina out, and there wasn't even enough room for light to enter. In case another barrage of bone spikes started to shoot out of the ground, the two stayed alert as they searched for a way out. To their astonishment, though, none arrived. Minato squinted, wondering why Orochimaru's servant wasn't assaulting them. They would need to find a way to break through the bone because they were surrounded and had no way out. Furthermore, it was evident that the bone was stronger than steel because Kushina parried it and it did not immediately cut through. It would take a while to finish. What prevented the Kagaya from using his advantage? Similar thoughts were going through Kushina's mind. It simply didn't make sense to pass up a chance to beat your opponent. It was nearly as though. Kushina looked at Minato and nodded her head as realization struck. Minato realized, and his posture eased, if only a little, as he glanced around at the bone forest. The Kagaya would have to wait a long time to employ the extremely chakra-intensive technique he had just used. But they had to act fast to sever the bone because they had no idea how long it would be before he could launch another attack. Kushina prepared her katana and started to charge the blade with her chakra. As this was happening, one of the bone spikes started to ripple out of their line of sight, and a tiny extension started to emerge from it and take shape. With Sasuke and Naruto and Sasuke's eyes were locked on each other. In each other's eyes, the intention to kill was evident. Sasuke's Sharingan eyes whirled as the black lines of the cursed seal of heaven licked across his skin. He started to cycle through hand signals, concluding with Kaiten, Gokakyu no Jutsu, and hurled a fireball at Naruto that was so hot that the lake surface they were standing on started to steam as it passed over it. A single kunai was hurled at the Uchiha, who was starting to move his arms from the hand seal he had completed, by Naruto, who reacted swiftly and leapt to the side, barely avoiding the approaching ball of fire. When Sasuke saw the approaching kunai, he widened his eyes and barely avoided being hit by it. The kunai clanked against the stone statue behind him so forcefully that stone fragments started to fall off. The blonde Jinchuriki's body was inflamed by a thin layer of the Kyuubi's chakra, and Sasuke gave him a savage snarl. His eyes turned a malevolent crimson, and his pupils narrowed into almost imperceptible slits. His nails also grew longer into sharpened claws, and his whisker marks thickened. In response, Naruto growled and swung his fist back at Sasuke. In a kind reply, Sasuke swung his hook and threw himself at Naruto. Although Sasuke's strike was only a second faster, the two strikes collided. When Naruto's punch hit Sasuke in the shoulder, he was flung backward and spun around so violently that he suffered from severe whiplash. Sasuke's punch had taken Naruto off course, causing him to skid across the water and lose his vision. The force of the blow almost caused a concussion. At last, Sasuke stopped spinning, his eyes hazy as he struggled to focus, and he collapsed to his knees, clutching his head and letting out a deep, agonized groan. His vision gradually returned after a few seconds, but he was still very unsteady even as he attempted to stand. He snarled to himself and looked toward Naruto. The Yuki of the Kyuubi no Yoko was healing his wounds as he prepared, slowly rolling his shoulders, moving his feet into a combat position, and staring at the Uchiha, who recovered seconds after he did. Naruto was also recovering, just as Sasuke was, as he slowly started to stand up and recover from his blurred vision. Sasuke glared at Naruto as he rushed forward, drawing his fist back and swinging it as hard as he could. Sasuke barely avoided the punch, but the force of it sent air into his eye, causing him to close it reflexively. In response, Naruto raised his knee, smashed it into Sasuke's nose, and cracked his head back so hard that Sasuke was launched into the air. The heir of the Uchiha clan swore to himself as he felt the blow and attempted to move to counterattack. Because the bones had undoubtedly been hit, he let the blow carry him through the air, used the momentum to perform a backflip, and then acted fast, swinging one foot upwards, which struck Naruto's solar plexus and sent a loud cracking sound. As Naruto felt the air being sucked out of his lungs, his eyes widened and he gasped. Sasuke saw his chance to take control and seized it. With all the force he could muster, he swung his fist, hitting Naruto under the chin and sending him reeling back. Reacting once more, Sasuke ran up to the airborne Jinchuriki and kicked forward, sending Naruto flying backwards and skidding across the water as his heel smashed into his chest. As Sasuke observed Naruto lying down on the water, a smirk appeared on his face. After defeating Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi and the Yondaime's precious son, his mind was racing with potential. The fact that he conquered a challenge that should have been insurmountable for lesser men was obviously an indication of his superiority. Naruto tried to stand up as the Kyuubi's chakra started to heal his body while he lay on the water's surface, struggling to breathe. But before he could even reach his knee, a foot struck his upper back, sending him crashing back into the water. A hand then grabbed his hair, and he felt a fist repeatedly strike the side of his head, severely blurring his vision. Sasuke laughed maniacally as the dark markings of the curse seal covered his body in so many markings that his skin was hardly visible. He sneered with a twisted grin as his curse mark covered more of his body, his eyes taking on a malevolent gleam as he laughed. Ha ha ha. You thought you could kill me, Dobi? He continued slamming his fist into Naruto's head, the water splashing with each impact. As Naruto reached around to push Sasuke away from him, he started to choke, but the Uchiha sneered and viciously grabbed his arm. He screamed, "You dare to touch me?" with disgust and hatred, as though a sick criminal had touched him. He bent Naruto's elbow in the exact opposite direction by slamming his foot into it after twisting Naruto's wrist around. Sasuke yanked Naruto upwards and then repeatedly punched him in the back, causing him to cough up blood that trickled down his lips. Naruto let out a silent gasp of pain, not having enough air in his lungs to yell. Before hurling Naruto as hard as he could, causing him to crash into the nearby canyon wall, where his clothing was caught on a stone outcropping, Sasuke continued to smile, his left eye starting to twitch as he rapidly became more insane. He then hung there, his feet hanging just a few inches above the water. As his Sharingan eyes started to spin wildly, Sasuke panted and reached for his kunai pouch, pulling out a kunai as he approached Naruto. His twisted grin grew even more cruel as the black markings gradually disappeared. Sasuke stalked toward Naruto, who hung there still moaning in agony. While this was going on, the Kyuubi's cloak quickly started to try to heal Naruto's wounds, fading until it was nearly invisible. As he watched Sasuke's figure slowly approach him each time he attempted to regain control of himself, Naruto's eyes fluttered as his vision flickered between a blurred series of hazy shapes and the eternal blackness of unconsciousness, repeatedly slipping in between the barrier between. Get up! Even as Naruto heard the voice reverberating in his head, his eyes continued to flutter. Get up and run! Naruto's vision gradually improved as he watched Sasuke's figure take shape and he could start to distinguish Sasuke's hazy colors as he approached. Are you planning on dying at this Uchiha's hands? He could sense the hate and malice in the voice as it screamed loudly and angrily. Are you planning to lie down and pass away? Sasuke stood in front of Naruto as the voice inside his head started to grow louder. He put the edge of his kunai against Naruto's throat and laughed, pathetic. He then slowly moved the blade's edge away from Naruto's throat and started to twirl it between his fingers. As the voice got louder, Naruto's body remained motionless, his eyes darting. Hurry, hurry! Sasuke stopped spinning the kunai and grabbed Naruto's hair before raising his head and revealing his neck. Come on, hurry up! With an arrogant sneer, Sasuke said, You die as you live, Dobi, a failure. He aimed the blade at his throat and swung it down. Get your act together. As Sasuke swung the kunai, preparing to jam it into Naruto's throat, his eyes were spinning and practically glowed with craziness. Dai Namikaze. Just inches from the kunai piercing Sasuke's throat, Naruto's eyes suddenly opened, and the arm that Sasuke had previously disabled sprang out and grabbed Sasuke's wrist. Sasuke's eyes widened, and he was momentarily brought back to reality as he felt a huge, dark presence start to build up. He also felt an inexplicable sense of power radiating off of his opponent that was unlike anything he had ever experienced from anyone. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced from Gaara or from Itachi. The sensation of being totally outclassed as he snarled, Naruto glared at Sasuke and slowly cracked his neck, causing the sound to reverberate throughout the now deadly silent canyon. His other hand then sprang out and wrapped itself around Sasuke's throat, causing the red Yuki of the Kyuubi no Yoko to flow out and burn Sasuke's flesh. Sasuke started to gasp in agony as he felt his skin start to crack and scorch and his curse seal start to wear off, causing the pain to intensify. A sharp snap sounded as Naruto squeezed his wrist, and Sasuke let out a choked cry of pain as the bone broke and was scorched by the Kyuubi's Yuki. Meanwhile, Naruto tightened his grip on Sasuke's throat until his eyes turned bloodshot from deprivation of oxygen. Sasuke started to feel dizzy and his vision became blurry, but then he was abruptly pulled forward and found himself looking directly into Naruto's eyes. The eyes of the devil, those eyes. Never before had Sasuke gazed into the eyes of a real monster. Unlike his brother, who was only a human attempting to be a monster, he felt himself shudder in fear. He was only that, no matter how hard he tried. However, Naruto, those eyes. The eyes belonged to a real monster. After giving Sasuke a long look, Naruto snorted and yelled, Who's the failure now, Teme? Naruto swung his head forward before Sasuke could react, tearing the cloth that was supporting him and smashing his head into Sasuke's face, breaking the Uchiha's nose in the process. Naruto landed on the water as Sasuke retreated, then rushed forward, slamming a closed fist into Sasuke's face and sending him flying back. Sasuke was thrown back with such force by the blow that he flew through the air, crashed into the lake, skidded a considerable distance, and then stopped midway across the lake. RWOOAARR, Naruto swung his head back, still holding his arm outstretched, the Kyuubi's Yuki flaming off of him like some unholy fire. He then let out a guttural roar as the Kyuubi's Yuki exploded out with such force that it crashed through the water, boiling it until it became a cloud of steam in a single instance. Sasuke looked up at Naruto and attempted to stand, but his broken nose was gushing blood, and he was trying to stop the bleeding with his other hand. As the Kyuubi's Yuki started to fade and his wounds started to heal, steam was streaming off of him, and the lake below him was boiling due to the heat of the Kyuubi's Yuki. Naruto turned back to Sasuke. As the Kyuubi's Yuki fully withdrew, the lake gradually ceased to boil, leaving only enough for Naruto's eyes to continue to be demonic. Before he ran through hand signals and completed Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. In a cloud of smoke, Naruto snorted and gave Sasuke a menacing glare as he tried to remain motionless. Two more Naruto clones then materialized next to him, in combat positions. With wide eyes, Sasuke gazed before he eventually stood up. When the three Narutos realized this, they dashed across the river in his direction. Sasuke saw them coming and attempted to strike back with his right arm while using his left to stop his nose from bleeding. While the second clone clotheslined Sasuke, the first clone moved closer before he could react, striking him hard in the stomach. Naruto leapt behind Sasuke and gave him a roundhouse kick to the back, sending him flying forward as Sasuke whirled through the air. A deafening crack echoed out as one of the clones grabbed Sasuke's arm, spun him around, and smashed him into the water before throwing him at the other clone, who caught Sasuke as he skidded across the ground and performed an elbow drop directly onto Sasuke's chest. When the clones grabbed Sasuke by the arms and leapt into the air, the original Naruto ran at him. He smashed both of his feet into Sasuke's abdomen, causing him to cough up more blood before collapsing to his knees. "Ugh!" Sasuke screamed out, his voice gargled by the blood in his mouth, as the two clones held him up and tugged hard on his arms until they popped out of their sockets with a loud crack. When the clones released their grip, Naruto retaliated by putting his foot into Sasuke's knee and fully bending it back, causing the Uchiha heir to scream again as he collapsed. A second crack echoed, presumably due to the force of Naruto's blows breaking Sasuke's cheekbones. Naruto grabbed the Uchiha heir by his onyx hair and then repeatedly smashed his knee into Sasuke's already broken nose. At last, Naruto threw Sasuke over his head with all of his strength, causing him to crash into the canyon wall's rock face before slipping into the water. With a grunt, Naruto gestured to Sasuke, and the two clones charged at him, Naruto trailing behind. The clones closed in on Sasuke as he attempted to stand, and one of them grabbed his hair and another his right arm. They then kicked him in the sides while he gasped and coughed, beating him senselessly. With a frown on his face and no emotion, Naruto watched as he withdrew his own kunai, charged at Sasuke, and prepared to aim it at Sasuke's heart. The Uchiha was unable to resist the two clones' relentless beating, and his curse seal was eroding more and more as he started to lose blood and could no longer shield his wounds. His eyes widened a little as he looked up and saw Naruto charging at him with a kunai in hand. He made an unsuccessful attempt to free himself from the clones' hold, as their grips only grew more tightly as they tugged harder at his limbs. He let out a weak, pathetic whine in agony, demonstrating how severely disabled he was from this battle. He hissed in agony as he watched Naruto approach, and the clones appeared to stop hitting him and just held him there, crushing his limbs where they grabbed him. As Naruto approached him, he noticed something, and his eyes cocked. He had witnessed Naruto moving at full speed during the battle, and although his strength was obviously inferior to his own, he had noticed that Naruto had a certain power, and something was very clear to him as he watched Naruto approach him. Naruto took his time getting to him rather than racing to the top of his game. He didn't even think he was deserving of a full-scale attack. This caused a rise in the Uchiha, who experienced feelings of disgusted embarrassment, anger, and hatred. He was a Uchiha, and this vile jerk dared not take him seriously? As those thoughts raced through the Uchiha's mind, the curse mark reacted to his darker feelings and swiftly spread like a swift river across rock, covering every inch of his skin until the dark marks of the curse seal gradually engulfed it. As the curse seal started to quickly envelop Sasuke, the clones sensed a change in the texture of his skin and both of them looked down. The back of Sasuke's shirt ripped open in two spots as they did so, and two enormous protuberances pierced the clones, dispelling them both. After a moment of stumbling as the memories of the clones came back to him, Naruto turned to face Sasuke, and his eyes widened a little. His hair rapidly grew longer until it appeared as though he had a flowing mane behind him, and his skin turned a dark gray. The most peculiar aspect was that a black shuriken-shaped mark appeared on the bridge of his nose, extending across his cheeks and the ridgeline of his nose. The most peculiar feature was the pair of wings that protruded from his back. They were each shaped like a human hand and had webbing between them. The psychotic gleam returned with full force, but this time it was tinged with mad savagery. Sasuke's wounds healed quickly as he changed into this monstrous state. After fortifying himself, Naruto lunged ahead and swung the kunai in Sasuke's direction. Instead, Sasuke grabbed Naruto's wrist, swung the blonde Jinchuriki over his shoulders, and threw him with all of his strength, causing him to crash into the nearby wall. After sliding down the canyon wall and landing on his feet, he dropped to one knee and swore while gazing at the changed Sasuke. His eyes widened as he saw Sasuke fly at him so fast that he had no time to dodge before he crashed into him and slammed him against the wall. He grabbed onto Naruto's biceps and started to squeeze hard, his now sharpened nails digging into his flesh. "Ah!" Naruto exclaimed in agony as Sasuke started to exert pressure. "That's it, Namikaze, scream for me," he said, squeezing harder as a steady stream of blood ran down Naruto's arms. Sasuke smirked. Then a twisted grin stretched across his features before he threw his head back in laughter. As Sasuke persisted in trying to cause him as much pain as possible, Naruto gritted his teeth and growled in agony. With a painful grunt, he started to shape chakra toward his palm, forming the first two stages of the Rasengan, and then he let go, sending a burst of chakra crashing into Sasuke's abdomen. Gra! Sent Sasuke flying backwards once more, but he quickly stopped his motion with his wings and sneered at Naruto. Naruto swiftly retrieved a handful of kunai from his pouch and started tossing them in rapid succession, sending them all flying in Sasuke's direction. After giving a dismissive grunt, Sasuke flailed his wings and launched a powerful air blast that knocked the kunai off course. He then shot towards Naruto, his wings propelling him across the water's surface. When Naruto attempted to react, Sasuke used his advantage of flight to strike him with a vicious uppercut, sending him flying. A second round of rising kicks sent Naruto hurtling even higher into the air, where he started to fall freely. With a laugh, Sasuke pulled out a kunai, swung at Naruto's arm, and shot upwards in the direction of the falling Naruto. Sching, as Naruto kept falling, the knife cut through his arm and a stream of blood emerged. Flying high above him, Sasuke continued to laugh while he ran through a series of hand signals, saying, "Kaden. Hosenka no Jutsu," and spat out a barrage of fireballs that rained down on the falling Naruto. When Naruto saw the approaching fireballs, he was unable to avoid them and they slammed into his chest. Gah! When his fall was accelerated, his clothes caught fire. The sound of his body slamming into the water's surface was nearly deafening, and there was unmistakable evidence of bones breaking. As he flew down towards the water's surface, landing a good 20 feet away from Naruto's impact zone, Sasuke threw his head back in laughter upon witnessing the ensuing collision. It seemed as though he was reveling in the pain he had undoubtedly caused his opponent and the deed he had performed. Naruto's teeth were clenched so tightly that, if he weren't a shinobi, they would have started to break. The impact that followed broke the bones in his back, sending pain shooting through his body as he felt like his entire being was being torn apart, limb by limb. The Kyuubi's Yuki was working extra hard to heal him as he started to force himself to stand, cringing in agony. Naruto was getting up too slowly to avoid his impending attack, so Sasuke grabbed his forearm as arcs of Raiden chakra ran up it and he started to smile as he ran through hand signs. His lightning-covered hand started to arc as he ran forward, shocking the water and sending a volatile current that killed a number of fish that were swimming too close. Naruto instantly recognized the impending attack. As Sasuke swung his arm forward, aiming his attack at Naruto's heart, he felt the Kyuubi's chakra start to envelop him once more. Naruto backhanded him with such force that he flew back too quickly and too abruptly for his wings to do more than break his fall. Chidori. Oif. After his attack subsided, Sasuke raised his head and growled as he watched the red cloak of Kyuubi no Yoko envelop Naruto's body. However, his eyes shifted as he realized that this was not a random cloak, rather, it was starting to take shape. Around Naruto, the Kyuubi's Yuki started to form a silhouette. Two fox-like ears emerged from the top of the silhouette, and a single tail emerged from the base close to the end. In the meantime, Naruto's physical characteristics grew even more malevolent. For a moment, Naruto and Sasuke gazed at each other, and as the two monsters glared at each other, the canyon became quiet. "Ra!" was Naruto's initial response, and he rushed forward on all fours, in a direct line with Sasuke. At the same moment, Sasuke reacted by sending himself airborne and then diving forward, swooping in Naruto's direction. The water around them exploded from the force of their presence as the two abruptly clashed, their hands battling each other. Returning at the same time as Minato and Kushina. After filling the blade with chakra, Kushina prepared to swing it in an attempt to sever the surrounding bone forest. Minato gazed around in curiosity, but he stopped when he noticed a glimmer of movement as he peered into the bone forest's shadows. His eyes suddenly opened, and he leapt aside, saying, "Kushina," to Kushina. Kushina halted what she was doing and flipped backwards, her eyes widening as she did so. Kimimaro, who had fired at them from the forest, was barely avoided. Kushina scowled and struck the Kaguya's form with her blade. Crack, only to have a statue of bone sliced through by her blade. This caused Minato and Kushina's eyes to widen, and they both turned to face the form. A statue shaped like Kimimaro and composed entirely of bone was cut by Kushina's blade. The statue was attached to a lengthy bone shaft that protruded from the forest. Both of them gaped at the bone formation in front of them. "Behold, my trump card." As they spun around, Minato and Kushina's eyes widened in surprise at what they saw. Still in his monstrous form, Kimimaro was growing out of one of the bone shafts. The rest was still unfinished, but the upper body was emerging from the bone. Kushina attacked, swinging her sword, not wanting to give him time to finish growing. Crack! Kushina's eyes widened as she cut through another statue of bone rather than Kimimaro. What the hell had just happened? Kushina's and Minato's eyes widened in shock. From any pillar of bone in this forest, I can project an extension of myself, and if I ever need to avoid an attack, I simply abandon the current extension, and project a new one. As you can see, the two shinobi turned again, and saw Kimimaro slowly starting to grow out of the bones again. Your efforts to kill me are futile. Kushina looked at Kimimaro with FR. If you wanted to try and surprise us with your jutsu, telling us how it worked was not the way to go about doing this, especially if you wanted to defeat us. As his upper body completely emerged from the bone, Kimimaro blinked twice and said, "True, but I felt my final opponents should know how my jutsu worked." The way he phrased, "final opponents," as though he didn't think he would fight again, left both shinobi perplexed. Kimimaro appeared to notice their bewilderment and said, "Yes, my final opponents. I know that today is the day that I will die, in service to my lord and master, Orochimaru-sama." He coughed a little and wiped the blood from his lips slowly. "Whether it is my illness or by your hands that I die, it does not matter. While it would have been preferable to kill you before I myself die, it is clear that I will be unable to do that." He held out his arm, and a massive cone-shaped spear formed from rapidly curving spirals of bone. "However, I do not need to defeat you to complete my mission, as Sasuke is so close that my master will know he is coming, and will send his remaining servants to retrieve him." He was breathing heavily as he moved the enormous spear of bone. Not really caring about Sasuke's fate, Kushina and Minato scowled. "To hell with the Uchiha. All we want is," they said, but then they felt a tremendous outburst of demonic Yuki. The evil Yuki of the Kyuubi. Kimimaro must have sensed it too. Turning to face Minato and Kushina, he said, "While the Jinchuriki may be able to defeat Sasuke, I doubt he could defeat Sasuke and my master's servants at the same time. It would seem that Sasuke and the Jinchuriki are doing battle. My master's servants will be coming all the quicker." Gra. Kushina had shunshined to Kimimaro's position and was about to strike him. Kimimaro was just in time to block the blow, and he swung down with enough force to cut through the bone spear but not enough to kill. As Kushina's body started to deteriorate into bone and only a statue remained, Kimimaro pressed against him with apparent strain. When Kimimaro suddenly and unexpectedly shot at them once more, this time with much more ferocity and a sense of desperation, Kushina and Minato reacted. He was willingly risking his life, not caring about the consequences. He had no fear of dying. Kushina and Minato avoided Kimimaro as he tore down the walls and demolished his bone statues as he transitioned to a different physical form of himself during the duration of this dance of death. After a few minutes, Kimimaro was unquestionably slowing down, but Kushina was getting tired and Minato was getting more irritated. Blood trickled down Kimimaro's chin as he gazed at them, breathing heavily. Minato scowled as he observed their current predicament. Kimimaro was not allowing them to try to flee. Each time they attempted to breach the barriers, he launched a crazy attack that made them defend themselves before he lost consciousness. They would have to kill him before he spread his consciousness to another location if they wanted to get away. With a sly smile, Minato charged at Kimimaro while holding a Hiraishin kunai in each hand. He countered by aiming a single bone sword at Minato after Kimimaro blocked it with his bone spear. Kimimaro disappeared in a flash of yellow as Minato abruptly dropped the kunai he had been using to hit him and threw his other kunai. When Kimimaro noticed this, he looked around bewildered. His final error occurred when Minato flashed in the direction of the kunai he had thrown before disappearing in yet another golden flash and resurfacing next to the kunai he had dropped close to Kimimaro. Minato suddenly appeared beside Kimimaro, slitting his throat before he could even move. As he passed away, the Kagaya sagged over, his throat dripping blood. After giving a nod, Minato turned to Kushina and said, "Let's leave." Kushina nodded as she swung her sword as forcefully as she could, piercing the ceiling of the bone forest after running chakra through it. She made a hole big enough for them both to pass through after two more swings, and they hurried through it and went toward the area where they suspected their son had been using the Kyuubi's Yuki. They sensed a dark and repulsive chakra as well as the Kyuubi's Yuki growing stronger as they continued on their journey. Returning with Sasuke and Naruto with the Kyuubi's rippling chakra following him, Naruto collided with Sasuke. The two shinobi then collided with the canyon wall, and Naruto smashed his clawed hands into Sasuke's chest, tearing flesh and splattering blood. With a cry of agony, Sasuke slammed a knee into Naruto's stomach and pushed him across the side of his face before snatching him by the back of his shirt and launching himself skyward, where he kicked the Uchiha abomination in the abdomen and caused him to lose his hold. As he fell, Naruto threw out his hand, and the Kyuubi's Yuki reached out and encircled Sasuke. Then, yanking as forcefully as he could, Naruto sent Sasuke flying in his direction. Naruto then threw the Uchiha down toward the water. Naruto lunged down towards Sasuke, who gasped in agony as he did so. Naruto then planted his foot firmly in Sasuke's stomach, sending them both underwater as the force of the kick pushed them under. Sasuke started to get hurt when the Kyuubi's Yuki started boiling the water to unbelievable temperatures while the two shinobi were submerged. A trail of bubbles rose to the surface as Sasuke silently screamed beneath the water. His skin started to burn from the boiling water, so he quickly started trying to swim upwards with his wings. Naruto quickly trailed behind him as he seized Sasuke's leg and pulled him back under before striking him viciously until the skin on his face split and blood mixed with the boiling water. Under the water, Naruto growled and swam upward, dragging Sasuke along with him. Splash! He broke through the water's surface with such force that a plume of water formed and a strong wave smashed through it. Naruto and Sasuke were now 2 feet above the water after Naruto punched through it with such force. Sasuke was too stunned and in too much pain to respond when Naruto kicked him in the abdomen, knocking him back and sending him to the water's surface. Naruto then ran after him as the Uchiha whirled through the air. He extended his arm, took one wing in each hand, and started tugging as forcefully as he could on the wings in a fit of wrath. Sasuke's wings were pulled, and he let out a painful, "ah" sound. Hearing Sasuke's scream of agony, Naruto growled and slammed his foot as hard as he could into Sasuke's back. RIP caused the Uchiha's wings to be ripped off, propelling him forward and causing him to crash into the canyon's rock face. He slid to a stop as he hit the water's surface, where he started to scream in agony as he reached for the spot where his wings had been, the curse mark attempting to seal the bleeding wound. With a growl, Naruto charged at Sasuke, who was rapidly transforming into a purplish-red Rasengan by spiraling chakra into his palm. Naruto smashed the Rasengan into Sasuke's stomach and then into the rock face before Sasuke could react. Boom! Crack! Sasuke's forceful impact with the rock face caused enormous fissures that extended upward to the edge of the cliff. Even in his curse-sealed 2 state, Sasuke was bleeding profusely, and in a last-ditch effort to try to survive the battle, he gasped in agony as he attempted to strike Naruto. Until now, the only signs that Naruto had the Kyuubi's chakra coursing through him were the thicker whisker lines, the claws, and those red eyes. Both Naruto's Rasengan and the Kyuubi's Yuki had vanished. After drawing a kunai, Naruto was ready to strike Sasuke in the throat. Crack, but before he could look up, he saw enormous stone formations start to fall in his direction, and his eyes widened. Numerous trees that were perched on the cliff's edge were being carried away by the rock face's rapid descent. Narrowly avoiding some enormous boulders and leaping out of the way of some incoming stones, Naruto was unable to avoid the ensuing wave in time, which submerged him. Along with the trees that had fallen into the canyon, the waves also carried a number of animals that had been stupid enough to be close to the edge of the cliffs. Near the base of Hashirama's statue, Naruto broke through the water's surface and ascended onto the base, gasping for air and muttering a curse to himself before turning to face the location where the cliff had collapsed into the waters below. With a sigh, he started to head back toward Konoha. Grrrrrn, only to have his eyes widen in surprise as his head turned toward a moaning sound. Sasuke, in his normal form, with no curse seal covering his features, was clinging to a tree that was floating next to Madara's statue base. As the Uchiha attempted to stand, Naruto turned back to face Sasuke, his eyes narrowing, and leapt to the tree, landing a hook punch to the side of Sasuke's face with enough force to send him landing on the base of Madara's statue. After falling a considerable distance, Sasuke collided with Madara's foot. The curse seal had completed healing him before it withdrew because he was no longer bleeding from the wounds where his wings had once been. After leaping onto the base, Naruto approached Sasuke and gave the Uchiha a kick to the stomach. Sasuke coughed up blood after gasping in agony. Snorted Naruto, "You had everything you could have ever wanted in Konoha, the villagers bowed to your very existence, and you still saw the need to run to Orochimaru. I don't know what is more pathetic, the fact that everything wasn't enough, or that you were willing to give up everything for nothing at all." Sasuke gritted his teeth in agony and muttered the remainder of his statement, S.Sh. "What?" Naruto asked, tilting his head. "Shut up, you. Why don't you have no right to lecture me?" He moaned in agony as he slowly turned his head, his black eyes full of hate. I lost everything, M.My family, it's all gone, nothing else matters," he said, looking at Naruto. How dare you lecture me? You have no idea what my pain is like, you goddamn monster." Monster Naruto's hands clenched tightly and his eyes twitched. Monster as he started to recall everything connected to that word, his vision became blurry due to his anger. Each and every beating, torment, and final insult directed at him. The civilian storekeeper, kindly, offered him a bite to eat before throwing him from his second-story window. The villagers laughed at his bad luck as he lay with his legs broken in front of the storehouse. The orphan matron who threw him out of the orphanage after whipping him with a lash. He was being used as a target by the genin who cut open his arm. He recalled everything. He recalled the insults as his teeth became so clenched that his canines started to give way. "Freak!" yelled the young girl who had stolen his food from the orphanage. The mother yelled, "Beast," after hitting him for attempting to play with her child. "Demon!" Mizuki's ugly face erupted as he attempted to murder him. The faces of the people who threw rotten food at him as he passed by said, "Monster." Sasuke watched in horror and morbid fascination as Naruto's posture changed, becoming so enraged and hateful. His eyes were blazing with rage. Naruto's eyes saw nothing, and his posture went limp. Nothing, no hate, no rage, no righteous rage. Sasuke observed Naruto turning to face the tree he had clung to for survival. Crack, as he saw Naruto snatch a branch from the tree and tug on it until it broke off. He turned to face him, his eyes hollow, his face stoic, and he said, "You're right, Sasuke, I have no idea the pain you felt in your life." He started to slowly approach Sasuke while holding the branch as he broke off the stems, saying, "I grew up alone, unwanted, my family non-existent. I don't know what it is like to be loved by a mother, father, or brother, only to have that all taken away." He turned to face Sasuke, saying, "I have no idea what it is like to have lost all that, and to be suddenly coveted by everyone for my loss." He said, "And I know, that no matter what you do, no matter what you say, I can never truly understand your pain." Sasuke gazed at Naruto, perplexed. But as he tightened his hold on the branch, he noticed a cold, enraged expression enter Naruto's eyes, causing his eyes to widen. Kushina and Minato. As this was happening, Minato and Kushina reached the valley and searched for their son until Kushina spotted him. "There," she said, pointing to the statue's feet, where they could see Naruto standing above Sasuke. Naruto. As he gripped the branch tightly, Naruto said, "However, while I cannot understand your pain." His voice took on a darker tone as he looked down at Sasuke. "Perhaps I can show you a bit of mine," he said, swinging the branch and giving Sasuke the hardest possible clocking across the jaw. Naruto kicked him in the stomach, causing Sasuke to gasp as his jaw broke. "Failure." Naruto sneered and slammed the branch into Sasuke's stomach. "Freak." He smashed the branch onto Sasuke's elbow, causing it to bend back and breaking the joint that made it possible for it to do so. Naruto slammed the branch so hard onto Sasuke's hand that it bent back and crushed the wrist bones. "Ah!" Sasuke screamed and reached to stop the branch, saying, "No, please How does it feel, Uchiha?" Naruto continued to slam the branch into Sasuke's body, without giving up. He then kicked and stamped on Sasuke's body until the bones started to protrude from the flesh. Both Kushina and Minato watched this unfold, their hearts aching to see how utterly broken their son was. Kushina's eyes were welling with tears, while Minato struggled to hold back his own. As the pain became unbearable, Sasuke started to cry. "Please stop," he pleaded, looking up at Naruto in agony, fear consuming his senses. "Tell me," Naruto yelled as he continued to strike him, lifting the branch high into the air and swinging it downward toward Sasuke's head. As one of the three shinobi suddenly shunshined behind Naruto while brandishing a long sword, Minato and Kushina both gaped in horror. Then Kushina cried out, "Naruto," however, it was too late. Squelch! Naruto halted abruptly as his eyes widened, his body seized, and he was covered in excruciating pain. Additionally, he caught a glimpse of a sword's blade piercing the left side of his chest. After Minato and Kushina watched in horror, Kushina yelled, "No." Minato and Kushina stared at the scene in front of them for what seemed like an eternity, even though it was only a few seconds. Both of them were unable to stop it because it happened so quickly. It was over as quickly as it happened, and now they were just staring. However, they reacted even more quickly. "No!" Kushina cried out a second time as she leapt forward, a red blur whizzing through the air. With his kunai drawn and prepared to dispatch the three shinobi in front of him, Minato had only been milliseconds slower. The forms of the three shinobi became visible as they turned to face them. A tall male with gray eyes and smooth, chin-length purple hair, with his hair falling just above his eyebrows, stood with the blade that had pierced Naruto's back. He was dressed in long gray trousers, a green short-sleeve shirt with white sleeves and a collar, and two black arm sleeves on his lower arms. Standing next to him was a woman with fair skin, a light blue eye, and longer hair that framed her face. Her hair was pulled up in a spiky ponytail. Her skin was fair, and her eyes were dark. Her left sleeve was longer than her right, and she was wearing a green dress. She also wore brown gloves and a red turtleneck with a fluffy collar. Kabuto Yakushi, a Konoha genin from the Chunin exams, was flanking the man with the sword. His black, rimmed glasses gleamed in the sunlight, and his white hair was pulled back in a long ponytail. As he prepared himself for an impending blow, he fixed his onyx eyes on Minato and Kushina. A stream of blood spurted from Naruto's back as the man with the sword saw them approaching and pulled back his blade. Both Minato and Kushina appeared to be so distressed by this that they were hesitant to attack. The male with the sword abruptly grabbed Naruto by the hair and threw the Namikaze's blonde son at them without even trying. The fastest to react, Minato dropped his kunai and sprang forward, catching Naruto as he fell. Minato stopped and skidded 10 feet on his knees. Minato worriedly glanced over Naruto after Kushina skidded right next to her, but she gasped in horror when she saw the wound. She was able to see right through him, and his heart had been broken. "I will fucking kill you," Kushina screamed as she swung her sword and charged chakra into it, her teeth gritting as she turned to face the three shinobi. When the group's female member noticed the approaching Kushina, she swiftly went over the hand signals. Abruptly, enormous purple crystals burst forth from the earth, splintering the ground and preventing Kushina from continuing. As she continued, she charged her katana with so much chakra and swung it so forcefully that the blade instantly started cleaving the crystals. Even as Kushina blasted through the crystals, swinging at the three shinobi, they split and started to crack quickly as they fell over. Only to discover that Sasuke had been taken with them when they disappeared. Before her face twisted into rage and she screamed, "Ah!" In her crazed state, Kushina stared in shock. Then, she prepared to pursue them, following whatever chakra signature they left behind. "Kushina." She stopped when she heard Minato yell at her, but she wasn't stopped by him calling her name. She was stopped by the desperate tone in his voice. She was instantly perplexed, so she turned around to see Minato holding Naruto and the red Yuki of the Kyuubi dripping off of him. Minato was only staring down at Naruto with a single, unidentifiable expression. Horror. Minato, what is?" she said as she looked down at Naruto after instantly regaining consciousness and running over to Minato and Naruto. It was then that she understood why Minato sounded so desperate. Naruto's chest hole was not closing. Minato mumbled, "T. The Kyuubi's Y. Yuki is R. Responding to H. His wound, but I.it won't close." With her eyes widening in horror, Kushina exclaimed, "We have to get to Konoha, now." "Grab onto me, Kushina, now," Minato said, nodding rapidly before grabbing Naruto and pulling one of his Hiraishin kunai from his pocket. Kushina followed orders. A golden flash engulfed them both as Minato gazed down at the kunai and poured his chakra into it, causing the seal to glow brightly. If they had stayed, they would have noticed a black box with writing on the side that was rolling down the crystal spire's edges before falling into the water below. This is the place where wars were waged, boundaries were established, and two souls met their demise. Your journey has finally come to an end as you have reached this bend. Hospital in Konoha. Thankfully, Kushina and Minato's clones picked up the retrieval team members as they arrived back in Konoha. They were taken right away to the Konohagakure Hospital, where they were receiving critical care for their wounds. Currently, Shikamaru was receiving intravenous fluid, a nutrient that aided in chakra regeneration. He would be bedridden for weeks, if not months, due to the damage he had done to his coils. Because he was attempting to use chakra that he just did not have, his own chakra had scorched the coils. Shoji had suffered a severe concussion. His skull was barely intact after splitting. To prevent him from bleeding out, medical shinobi were working non-stop. Medical ninjutsu and some rudimentary bolts had repaired the fracture in his jaw. Kiba was equally worn down. The branch that had lodged itself in his shoulder had left numerous splinters in the muscle tissue, making it challenging to close the wound since they had to take out every splinter before doing so. Neji had several stab wounds that needed to be closed, and his jaw needed to be put back in place. Thankfully, nothing had lodged in the wounds, and the stab wounds were smooth rather than jagged, making closure much simpler. After informing their families, their rooms were immediately filled with their loved ones. Hinata brought a basket of lavender flowers to Neji's room and placed them on his bed while frowning and glancing down at herself. Yakumo Kurama was standing beside her. She had come with the expectation that Naruto would be there by the time they arrived. She encountered Hinata while traveling to Neji's room. With a heavy sigh, Hinata turned to face the unconscious Neji and slowly got to her feet. Touching Hinata's shoulder tenderly, Yakumo said, "He'll be fine. The injuries weren't too bad," and Tsunade herself saw to the treatment. With a slight smile on her face, Hinata nodded. Tsunade had come to start healing the squad as soon as word got out that the retrieval team was back. However, it was fairly obvious that she had not come for any of the patients who were there at the time. Both Hinata and Yakumo were shocked to see Temari there, chatting with one of the physicians, as they followed each other out the door. The physician appeared annoyed. "Look, I told you, Naruto Uzumaki. Namikaze has yet to arrive at the hospital, for all we know he isn't even injured." "With this? Do you honestly think he isn't injured?" she asked, pointing to the hospital rooms, not amused. The doctor, who was beginning to lose patience, walked past her and shook his head angrily before going back to work. "Look, I have multiple patients to care for, I can't look for the honorable son right now. I am sorry." "So?" asked Hinata and Yakumo as they approached Temari, who was glaring at the doctor's back. With a sigh, Temari turned to face them and said, "No, Naruto hasn't arrived yet." Biting her bottom lip, Yakumo said, "I hope he is all right." Hinata also gave a nod. With a heavy sigh, Temari said, "There is nothing else we can do here, and the doctors will soon expel us for disturbing the peace, or something. We should wait by the gate and see if he shows up." After giving a nod, Hinata and Yakumo trailed behind Temari. Hinata and Temari continued to look at each other as they descended, turning away when the other turned around. As soon as they arrived in the lobby, Yakumo became irritated and finally yelled, "Okay, that's enough, you two." Both Hinata and Temari just stared in shock at Yakumo's outburst. "I understand that you both like Naruto, but all you two have been doing is dancing around the whole issue," Yakumo said, glaring at them both. "You are currently just fighting and staring at him from a distance, so you either talk to him about it or move on. You both appear to have forgotten that your little contest with Naruto will be in vain if he refuses to give you a chance, regardless of whether you want him." She sighed and turned around, saying, "Just tell him the truth. Maybe he will give you both a chance." She then proceeded to the lobby exit. Temari and Hinata exchanged a final glance before averting their eyes and trailing behind Yakumo. "Come on, maybe if we get to the gate we can see Naruto," Yakumo said, turning back to face them. Everyone had to cover their eyes as a burst of golden light suddenly engulfed the lobby. They all turned to face the front of the hospital entranceway as the light faded, and they saw that beneath the sign marking the entrance was a glowing seal that was only visible because it was glowing. However, it was the Yondaime and his wife holding their blood-covered son that caught their attention, not that. The sight in front of them horrified everyone. At least until Minato shouted, "I need critical care right now," unconsciously. He let out a burst of chakra and yelled so forcefully that it caused all of the windows to rattle. After regaining consciousness, the doctors piled on top of one another and seized Naruto before throwing him onto a stretcher. What on earth is Naruto? Even as more and more of the Kyuubi's Yuki started to leak off, everyone turned to see Tsunade and Shizune running towards Naruto, who had been strapped to a stretcher. "By Kami, why isn't?" Tsunade leaned over Naruto, her eyes widening as she saw the extent of the wound and her hand flying to her mouth. "God damn it! Save him!" Kushina interrupted. She screamed so loudly that the doctors in the area cowered and covered their ears when they saw her chakra start to flow out of her body. With a nod, Tsunade swiftly applied medical chakra to her hands. A physician said, "Tsunade, we need to get him too. Does he look like he can wait to get to the ICU?" Shizune yelled at the physician. "Damn it, help her." Shizune and a few others covered their hands with medical chakra, and the doctor jerked back before nodding. They waited for the wound to heal, but nothing happened. They were unable to comprehend what was going on. They could feel the Kyuubi's Yuki, which ought to have healed him but instead seemed to exacerbate the wound. Sweat trickled down Tsunade's brow as she gritted her teeth and directed her chakra toward Naruto's heart rather than the wound. Hoping it was working, she peered inside the wound. As she watched the heart start to knit itself back together, she exhaled in relief. "Focus all medical chakra on the heart. That's the damaged organ, we can fix the rest afterwards," Shizune said, turning to face the doctors. Following orders, they all concentrated all of their medical ninjutsu on his heart. While this was going on, Yakumo, Temari, and Hinata looked on in disbelief at what they were witnessing. With anxious expressions and obvious concern for their child, Minato and Kushina watched, both waiting to see what would happen. The wound on his heart closed up completely, leaving only a tiny scar to serve as a reminder. Tsunade exhaled in relief, until she became aware of something. There was no beat to Naruto's heart. "Get him to the intensive care unit immediately." Tsunade snapped her head in Shizune's direction as her eyes widened. Her orders were promptly followed by the doctors, who pushed his stretcher to the intensive care unit. Tsunade W. What is going on? Kushina stared in horror. Tsunade turned to Kushina and said, I need to restart his heartbeat immediately because he is in pulmonary arrest. As the doctors headed to the intensive care unit, she chased after them. For a split second, Minato and Kushina stood there, then sprinted after her, their faces plastered with fear. Temari, Hinata, and Yakumo were too stunned to respond as they both sprinted past them. As her legs shook and she gradually dropped to her knees, Yakumo just stared ahead in horror. Temari and Hinata weren't doing any better, but Hinata snapped out of her daze and rushed after Naruto, shoving Temari aside and bringing her back to the present. Why? Yakumo, Temari said, shaking her head and turning to face Yakumo. With a trembling voice, Yakumo raised her hand and said, G. Go T.toicu, I'll get T. the others. Temari simply gazed at Yakumo before nodding her head and sprinting after Hinata, catching up fast. With a vacant expression on her face as she felt the world crumble around her, Yakumo slowly got to her feet and staggered towards the door. ICU Tsunade, Shizune, and 6 other medical shinobi surrounded Naruto as his stretcher was carted into the intensive care unit, hooking him up to a heart rate monitor while she poured more medical chakra into her palms, which arced as she pressed them against Naruto's chest. When a heartbeat started to appear on the heart rate monitor, Naruto's body jerked. Quickly turning to the other physicians, Tsunade said, do a diagnostic jutsu on him right now. She kept her hands over his heart, ready to jumpstart it once more. We need to figure out what's wrong now and fix it. Shizune and 2 other medical professionals immediately covered their hands with medical chakra and started dragging them over his body while hovering a few centimeters away from him. There is something in his system, some sort of poison, Shizune said, her palms glowing as she glanced at Tsunade and seemed at a loss for words as she glanced between Tsunade and Naruto. Well, what is it? Tsunade asked, gazing at Shizune. Shizune turned back to Tsunade after biting her bottom lip and said, it is inhibiting the Kyuubi's chakra, it's stopping it from healing Naruto's wounds. What? Kushina, Minato, Hinata, and Temari were standing there with their mouths open when Tsunade and Shizune's eyes shifted to the ICU entrance. Shizune, get them out of here, now, Tsunade said, glancing at Shizune. After nodding and pausing to examine Naruto's body, Shizune approached the entrance and said, we need you to leave now. She attempted to gently nudge them out of the intensive care unit. The heart rate monitor abruptly started to flatline. Damn it! Tsunade swore as she shocked Naruto's heart once more. Prepare a Shozen Jutsu. We must move it if Kyuubi refuses to heal him. Her orders were instantly followed by the doctors, but they jumped back when the Kyuubi's Yuki engaged their jutsu. Tsunade. Sama, the Kyuubi's Yuki, said one of the physicians as he turned to face Tsunade. With a snap, Tsunade said, I saw it. She cursed as she looked at Minato. With a sudden jerk, Minato's head turned to face Tsunade. We will lose the Kyuubi if you don't get me a seal to suppress his Yuki right away. The Kyuubi's Yuki started to fade as Minato, who required no further instruction, rushed forward and swiftly started drawing up a seal, which he affixed to Naruto's forehead and 3 more on his chest and abdomen. The heart rate monitor abruptly started to flatline once more. As she attempted to restart his heart, Tsunade's eyes widened and she swore, shouting to the doctors, Shozen Jutsu now. As soon as the doctors pushed Minato away in an attempt to save Naruto, Shizune and the doctors started using Shozen Jutsu. Before the machine displayed Naruto's heart's flatlining once more, it beat twice. After cursing, Tsunade performed the jutsu and checked the heart rate monitor. The heart beat once, twice, and then flattened out once more. As she attempted to rekindle his heart, Tsunade's eyes were filled with fear. Kushina, Minato, Hinata, Temari, and nurses who arrived with medical supplies witnessed the scene. His heart beat once on the heart rate monitor before flatlining out once more. As she looked down at Naruto, Tsunade's hands started to shake. She pressed her palms against his chest and tried to restart his heart by using the jutsu once more. She waited in muted silence while she and the other observers gazed at the heart rate monitor. Nothing. Tsunade stared at the heart rate monitor in panic as she made another attempt. Nothing. When she tried again, she bit her lip and looked at the heart rate monitor, hoping to see anything. Not a single heartbeat, nothing. When the flatline sounded, the entire room fell silent, and the sound reverberated throughout the hospital's hallways as staff and patients passed by and noticed Yondaime and his wife staring into the intensive care unit. Gazing at the bed that contained their deceased son's body, Tsunade gazed down at Naruto's body, his dead body, and as the realization set in, she collapsed to her knees and closed her eyes, letting silent tears fall from her lids. The Yondaime and his wife's horrified faces were visible in the doorway. The two young girls' eyes were filled with hopelessness as Hinata collapsed to her knees and saw her entire world fall apart. Minato could only watch as his knees bent and hit the chilly hospital floor, and he felt his legs give way under the weight of his own body until he was unable to bear it any longer. After gazing at Naruto's body, Kushina walked forward with considerable effort, trembling as she extended her hand. As Kushina reached for Naruto and gently put her hand on his chest, the doctors and Shizune stepped aside. Not a single heartbeat, nothing. As soon as she realized how serious the situation was, tears started to fall down her cheeks. She screamed loudly, her lips separating, "No," as she fell to her knees, her face pressing against Naruto's chest, as she began to sob, her tears. "No, no, no," she sobbed uncontrollably and shouted into his chest, her voice muffled. Her sole child, her Sochi, who had liberated her, and Minato from Orochimaru's hold just by virtue of their existence, was deceased.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.